You will kneel before Her Majesty to receive the honor.
I don't kneel. Not before anyone.
They put a medal on me in a palace, and I refused to kneel. 150 million books with my name on them sat on shelves across 30 countries. I won every literary prize that mattered before I turned 23. But before any of that, I was a 31-year-old failure, dying in a parking lot. I didn't know it was dying at the time. I thought it was just another bad day. The company had cut our salaries in half. My boss told me I should be grateful they hadn't fired me outright. Grateful. I lit a lickin' cigarette and watched the flame tremble between my fingers. I'd been a good kid once, top of my class until high school broke me. The pressure, the expectations, my parents' hopes sitting on my shoulders like wet concrete. I cracked, gave up. My father sent me to the military. The army fixed me. Then, a training injury crippled me. I opened a snack shop. The pandemic killed it. I followed my father to a construction site, poured concrete during the day, studied for certifications at night, passed my exams, and then the industry collapsed. 31 years old. Every door I'd walked through had slammed shut behind me. If I had just kept studying, I muttered. If I had withstood the pressure in high school, my life would have been completely different. A sharp pang hit my chest. My vision went black. My knees hit pavement. The next thing I heard was my mother's voice. Not the mother I knew. The tired woman in her 60s with gray roots showing. This voice was younger, louder, panicked. "Doctor, is my son okay? He's fine. All his indicators are normal. Probably just heat exhaustion. He'll be all right." I opened my eyes. Two faces hovered over me. Young faces. My father's jaw was tighter, his hair darker. My mother's cheeks were fuller, her eyes brighter. "Dad," I whispered. "Mom, why are you so young?" My mother's worried expression instantly turned dangerous. "What nonsense are you talking about? Was your mother very old before?" She sent my father to get the doctor again. I lay there, staring at my own hands. Small hands, smooth, no calluses from construction work, no scars from the military. The calendar on the hospital wall read, August 2nd, 2010. I was 17 years old. After the hospital, my mother took me home. The apartment was small, less than 100 square meters, but it had carried my entire adolescence inside its walls. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the furniture, the door frames, the peeling wallpaper. Everything was exactly as I remembered. I called out toward the kitchen, "Mom, I want to eat spare ribs." The words came out before I could stop them. 14 years since I had tasted her cooking. 14 years of instant noodles and construction site lunches and snack shop leftovers. And all I wanted was spare ribs. She called back that she would go to the market. I told her to be careful on the road. She paused, surprised by my concern, and I heard her murmur to herself as she left. "After being sick, he's become more considerate." I stood in the bathroom, staring at the mirror. The young man looking back at me was 178 centimeters tall, with short black hair falling casually across his forehead, bright eyes, slightly thin lips, a simple white t-shirt and jeans. He looked ordinary, clean, unbroken. I touched my cheek, feeling the real warmth of skin that hadn't been aged by smoke and sun and failure. "Hello, Liwen," I whispered to the mirror. "Hello, new world. If you're already hooked on this story, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now?" My father came home that evening. He stood in my doorway, studying me with that quiet, measuring look he always had. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much better, Dad." I looked at him and felt 14 years of distance collapse into a single moment. In my first life, I had pushed him away with teenage rebellion, and neither of us had known how to close the gap. After the army, I had wanted to apologize, but pride got in the way. Silence became habit. Habit became estrangement. Not this time. I made myself a silent promise. I would not repeat those mistakes. I would live a life that made this man proud. At dinner, my mother served 4 dishes and a soup. I stopped eating, looked at her, and smiled. "Mom, I'll wash the dishes tonight. Before school starts, I'll do them every night." She stared at me like I had grown a second head. My father looked up from his bowl. "Did you borrow money from someone?" My mother asked immediately. "No, I just want to help out. I'll do the dishes. Give me 20 yuan each time." My father considered this. 15, I blinked. "You're haggling with your own son? 15 is already generous. A month of that and you'll earn over 1,000. Where else are you getting a deal like that?" Fair enough. Then I told them I wanted to switch to humanities. My mother panicked. "Boys who study science get better jobs. Everyone knows that." But my father cut her off with a single question. "Have you thought it through?" Yes, then it's fine. He picked up his chopsticks again. But if you don't do well in the college entrance exam, you're following me to the construction site. After dinner, my mother interrogated my father about whether I was in love. My father just read his newspaper. Some things never change. That night, I sat at my desk planning my future. In my bedroom, the walls were still covered with posters of Kobe and Jay Cho. My old Nokia 5320 sat on the desk, a gift from my father when I got into this school. I had already ruled out the obvious shortcuts. Lottery? Nobody memorizes winning numbers. Startups? My past life snack shop proved I wasn't ready. Real estate and Bitcoin would come later. But right now, my identity was a student, and my primary task was education. Academic qualifications are the threshold to everything. Without them, doors don't open. I had learned that the hard way. Then, a crisp notification sound rang inside my mind. Study hard, make progress. Everyday module is loading. The progress bar crawled upward, failed once. Active module damaged, reloaded from backup. Then hit 100%, and a new interface bloomed behind my eyes. An intelligent learning system from the 22nd century. On a distant Earth where knowledge had become elite-gated, a company called Yi-K had built this system for ordinary people. Deep learning mode that boosted comprehension by 300% for 2 hours each day. A points system that rewarded genuine study. And a lottery, 100 points per draw, pulling literary masterpieces from a parallel Earth. The system was damaged, incomplete. The lottery could only draw literary works. But backed by the literary resources of an entire planet, that was more than enough. I entered deep learning mode and covered an entire first-year math textbook in 2 hours. When I surfaced, my neck was stiff and the sunset was painting my desk gold. But I had absorbed more in one session than I had in a month of high school. There were 27 days until school started, enough time to review everything. In my first life, I had studied science. It led nowhere. This time, I chose humanities. Not because it was easier, but because I remembered every book, every author, every masterpiece from a world that didn't exist here. My competitive advantage wasn't formulas, it was literature. On September 1st, I walked through the gates of Lucheng No. 2 Middle School for the first time in 14 years. The teaching building was still the old one. No air conditioning, no gymnasium, nothing new. I found my class, stood in the doorway, recognized every face, and realized I had no idea which desk was mine. Wenzi, over here! Guo Wei, 185 centimeters of grinning, basketball-obsessed loyalty, my deskmate. In my first life, he had gone on to pass the civil service exam, a genuinely good man. Wei Gay, long time no see. I told you not to call me Wei Gay? Okay, Wei Gay. I switched to class 2, humanities. Guo Wei was already there. He stared at me like I had lost my mind. Aren't you a science student? Mainly because I couldn't bear the loneliness without you, Wei Gay. That earned me a laugh from the girl sitting in front of him, Wu Xiaoli, tiny and fierce. She raised her fist when she caught us looking. What are you staring at? Watch out or I'll beat you up. Some things definitely never change. By the time school started, I had accumulated 266 points through genuine study. My first lottery draw had given me a global history textbook, and through it, I discovered something that changed everything. The history and culture of this world ran astonishingly parallel to my old Earth. That meant most literary works could be used here with minimal changes. I used 100 points on a second draw. The system gave me The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry, a short story about sacrifice and love, about a couple who each sell their most precious possession to buy a gift for the other. It didn't exist in this world. I sat at my computer that night and edited the manuscript, adjusting details to fit this reality. Then, I found the submission email for Mengya magazine, the most influential youth literary publication in the country, founded in 1956. I signed the story Moodzi and clicked send. Moodzi, my pen name. Nobody would know that the author was a 17-year-old kid in a second-floor classroom. My last 100 points went to a third draw. The system gave me The Necklace by Maupassant, a devastating tale about vanity and its price. About a woman who borrows a necklace for a party and spends 10 years repaying the debt, only to learn the necklace was fake. Another masterwork that had never been written here. I began adapting it immediately. The reply from Mengya came faster than I expected. An email confirming acceptance. The editorial staff called my story groundbreaking and praised the suspenseful ending technique. Publication was scheduled for the October issue. 600 yuan per 1,000 words. about 2,100 yuan total, the first money I had earned in either lifetime that came from my own mind instead of my own sweat. Meanwhile, I brought the necklace to my Chinese teacher, Yuan Yali. She was 28, sharp-featured behind black-rimmed glasses, and the kind of teacher who made you want to try harder without ever raising her voice. She read the story overnight and brought it straight to Director Zhang, the head of the Chinese language department. Director Zhang was an old teacher nearing 50 with 30 years of experience. He read the necklace and went quiet for a long time. Then he walked to Yuan Yali's office and asked her if she was absolutely certain a student had written this. They called me in. Director Zhang asked me why I wrote it. I told him the truth, or the version of it I could tell. The true reason lies in the word vanity. I have observed many adults paying a heavy price due to it. Living on tiptoes will never allow one to stand firm. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Though you are young, your breadth of vision surpasses that of many adults. He suggested I submit the story to the new concept writing competition. The deadline for preliminary submissions was November 25th, 86 days away. No student from our city had ever won an award. Director Zhang intended me to be the first. That same afternoon, Tongqing from Mengya called my phone. She was professional and warm, confirming publication details. Until I mentioned I was still in my second year of high school. The silence on her end lasted 3 full seconds. Second year? She managed. Well, okay, goodbye. I told my parents that evening over dinner. My mother didn't believe me until she called Teacher Yuan herself. After the phone call, she walked over with a grin so wide it could have split her face, grabbed my head, and kissed it. "You truly are my son," she said. "Unlike your father, who reads the newspaper all day and never gets anything from it." My father just sat there, blinking. "Why are you dragging me into this?" The second piece of news went down easier. The new concept submission, Director Zhang's support, the chance of reaching the semifinal. My mother put an extra spare rib on my plate. "You passed," she declared. "Time to eat." Not everything at school was academic triumph. A few days after the basketball season started, our class played Class 5. Their star player was Zhang Jiahao, quick, aggressive, and talented enough to score at will against our defense. He put up 14 points before our coach called a timeout, and we were losing badly. Wang Chao, our point guard, was rattled. He came off the court and asked me to sub in. The team looked at him. Guo Wei started yelling, but I just patted his shoulder and said I would take it. The truth was simple. I had played basketball for more than a decade longer than any of these kids. Army leagues, unit tournaments, pickup games after work. I wasn't a 17-year-old who couldn't shoot. I was a 31-year-old who had been running pick and rolls since before these boys hit puberty. On my first possession, I drew Zhang Jiahao and the center into a double team, pump faked them both into the air, and lobbed it to Guo Wei for an alley-oop. The gym erupted. The PE teacher from Class 5 turned to our coach in shock. "You were hiding this?" We clawed back the deficit. I stole the ball from Zhang Jiahao at half court and laid it in while he chased my shadow, tied at 20. Then he hit a mid-range jumper with 10 seconds left, 20-22. Class 5 started celebrating. 6 seconds. I took the inbound pass and sprinted to the front court. 3 seconds. Zhang Jiahao stood a step inside the three-point line. I pulled up from a step beyond it, released the ball, and turned around before it went through the net. The buzzer sounded. The ball dropped clean, 23-22. Guo Wei picked me up and screamed in my ear. Teacher Yuan walked over, patted my shoulder, and said with a smile, "Well played, Liwen." I told her it was just luck. It wasn't luck. It was 14 years of muscle memory in a body that hadn't been broken yet. After the game, the PE teacher from Class 5 offered me a spot on the school basketball team, provincial tournaments, possible university recruitment. I told him I would think about it. In truth, I already knew the answer. Basketball was fun, but it wasn't the plan. The plan was literature. But Zhang Jiahao didn't take the loss well. He took it worse when Shi Qingqing, a girl from my past life who I had no interest in repeating history with, walked over to congratulate me afterward, and I ignored her. She left with red eyes. Her friend Wang Ran glared at me. The whole school saw it. A few days later, Wang Chao found me at lunch. His face was serious. "Wenge, Zhang Jiahao hired thugs. Zuo Shun and his gang. They're planning to jump you after evening self-study tonight." Guo Wei slammed the table. "Let's go get the basketball team." I pulled him back down. I'm still a student. When something like this happens, I go to a teacher. Guo Wei stared at me. Seriously? Seriously. I went straight to Yuan Yali. She brought me to Director Zhang. Director Zhang called in Zhang Jiahao's homeroom teacher. They brought Zhang Jiahao to the office. He stood there, sweating, trying to lie. Director Zhang slammed his desk. Think carefully before you speak. It was over in minutes. The school called his parents. Zhang Jiahao was ordered to cancel the plan and face consequences. But the real twist came 3 days later. Zhang Jiahao, being exactly the kind of person who hires thugs, went to Zuo Shun's gang and demanded his money back. A pack of cigarettes and a bottle of cola per person. That was what he had paid them. He wanted it returned. Zuo Shun's crew had been drinking. They looked at this rich, annoying teenager with no backup and no leverage, and they beat him badly enough to put him in the hospital. I knew Zuo Shun from my previous life. 6 years from now, he would be sentenced to death for killing an underage student. The kind of people Zhang Jiahao thought he could control. His parents came to the school the next morning, furious. The police arrested Zuo Shun's gang, and during the investigation, everything came out. Zhang Jiahao had paid these thugs before, multiple times, multiple victims. The school reviewed the evidence and expelled him. Yuan Yali told me in her office the next day. She was wearing a black suit jacket over a floral dress, and she looked at me with the particular expression teachers get when they are both proud and slightly unsettled by a student. Zhang Jiahao has been ordered to withdraw, she said. Multiple school bullying incidents confirmed. You don't need to worry about it anymore. I nodded. Thank you, Teacher Yuan. She studied me. I've heard from other teachers that you've been studying very diligently. What happened? I told her the only version of the truth I could. I had a dream this summer. I dreamed I failed the college entrance exam and achieved nothing. I woke up terrified, so I decided to seize the moment. She believed it. It was, after all, exactly what had happened, just in a different life. The bully was gone. My first story was headed for publication. The system hummed quietly in my mind, ready for whatever I needed. And I sat at my desk in class 2, doing practice problems beside Guo Wei, while Wu Xiaoli yelled at him to shut up. And I thought, this is where it starts. Not with revenge, not with spectacle, just with a pen, a classroom, and a second chance I had no intention of wasting. The monthly exam results arrived on the last day before the National Day holiday, and they arrived the way results always do, with Yuan Yali walking into the classroom, carrying a stack of test papers, her heels clicking like a countdown. Everyone held their breath. The room went so quiet, you could hear the wind outside. She started with math, name by name, low to high, the tension building as the numbers climbed. Su Hao, 56. Xia Jinghua, 56. Their faces went white. Wu Yunju was shaking so hard I thought she might pass out. Then, the scores kept rising. Wang Chao, 108. Wu Xiaoli, 116. Liu Yining, 138. Guo Wei, 144. Yuan Yali paused. She looked up from the paper and found me. I want to give special praise to Liwen, 145. Great progress. The room buzzed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Liu Yining turn her head to glance at me, just for a second, before quickly looking away. Chinese came next. My score, 148. The highest composition score in the entire grade, 59 out of 60. The system had sharpened everything I wrote, but the words themselves came from 14 years of regret. I knew what it felt like to waste an education. Writing about it was the easiest thing I had ever done. When the rankings were announced, Guo Wei took first in our class with 685, Liu Yining second with 668. I came third with 655, seventh in the whole grade, a jump of 35 places from my previous ranking, 655. In 2009, Tsinghua University's arts cutoff in Shandong province had been 651. Wu Xiaoli turned around and stared at me with a complicated expression. Li Liwen, you've passed last year's Tsinghua admission score. This is just a monthly exam, I said. It doesn't mean anything, but it meant everything. It meant the system was working. It meant the studying was compounding. It meant that this time around, the doors that slammed shut in my first life were beginning to open. That evening, my mother grabbed my report card and nearly screamed. 655, third in the class, seventh in the grade. She was already on the phone before I could sit down, telling Sister Wang next door, telling my uncle, telling anyone with ears and a phone number. When I was buying groceries today, Sister Wang was bragging that her daughter got 620. Wait until she hears this. My father took the card and studied it silently, the way he studied everything, like a blueprint that needed checking twice. That faint smile pulled at the corners of his mouth, the one he wore when he was too proud to say so. "Your humanities scores need work," he said. "If you could improve those 3 subjects." He just aced the exam and you're already nagging. My mother came out of the kitchen with warm milk, swatting his words away. "We can talk about it tomorrow." My father shrugged and went quiet. I gave my mother a secret thumbs up behind his back. The next day, Yuan asked me to share my study methods at the class meeting. I had no magic formula to offer. The system was my formula, and I obviously could not explain that. So, I gave them the only thing I had that was real, the truth of my first life, disguised as a speech. I stood on the podium. Sunlight came through the windows and fell across the room. 40 faces looked up at me, and for a moment, I was not a 17-year-old student. I was a 31-year-old man who had seen what happens when you throw it all away. "I was born into an ordinary family," I said. "My parents never finished elementary school, but they always believed in education, and I never understood why, until one day I stepped into a busy intersection during rush hour and looked at the people around me. They were rushing past like distant stars, 2,000 or 3,000 yuan a month, the same commute, the same routine, and the emptiness in their eyes terrified me because I saw my own future in them." I paused. The room was silent. I imagined a future where my parents had gray hair, my ideals had vanished, and everything I once cared about had disappeared. And from that fear, I found the resolve to change. Why study? So that when you see birds in the sky, you say, "The sunset glows and the lone wild goose flies together," instead of, "Holy crap, so many birds." Laughter. Then silence again, because they knew I was not joking. So that in the future, you can discuss not just firewood and rice and salt with the person you love, but music and poetry and flowers. So that you live with dignity, I finished with the image that had haunted me through both lifetimes. I often imagine the afternoon when the college entrance exam ends. The bell rings. I put down my pen. I lean against the wall and look out through the window at the sunshine, and the golden light tells me that my efforts were worth it. Silence. Then the classroom erupted. Applause so loud it startled me. Guo Wei was staring at me like I had grown a second head. "Holy crap, you wrote that? That's insane." "Keep it low-key," I said. But inside, something warm settled in my chest, because the speech had not come from the system. It had come from me, from 14 years of living without dignity, and knowing exactly what it costs. Lu Yining was watching from her seat. She did not clap the loudest, but she did not look away. After school, I played basketball with the boys for the last time before the holiday. When I walked into the bicycle shed to grab my bike, someone was already there. Liu Yining, standing in the dim light, shoulders trembling slightly, like she was trying to build up courage. "Liwen, do you have any plans for the holiday?" I looked at her nervous face. In my first life, I had been oblivious to moments like this. In my second, I noticed everything, and I was careful with it. "I have plans," I said. Her face fell just for a second before she masked it. Then I added, "But I'll contact you when I'm done." She stopped, looked at me with wide eyes. Then she turned and ran out of the shed, calling back over her shoulder, "See you during the holidays, Liwen." I watched her go, a smile pulling at my lips. Youth. It really is something, but I had work to do. That night, before the holiday began, I did 2 lottery draws. The system took 200 points and gave me 2 results that would change everything. The first, Stray Birds by Rabindranath Tagore, an entire collection of poems, small enough to post 1 per day, beautiful enough to build a following. The second, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. The complete series, every deduction, every case, every word. I stared at the ceiling and started planning. In my first life, I had watched self-media explode. I had watched influencers go from nobodies to millionaires on the back of consistent content. The formula was always the same. Show up every day, give people something worth sharing, and by the time you have something to sell, the audience is already there. Sina Weibo had just launched in 2009 and was already becoming the center of Chinese social media. The timing was perfect. I registered an account under the name Muzi and posted my first poem. Summer birds fly to my window and sing, then fly away. Autumn leaves have nothing to sing. They just sigh and fall somewhere else. 1 poem a day, free content, building an audience before they even knew what was coming. By the time my novel dropped, these followers would be my first wave of buyers. Not because I told them to buy, but because they already trusted my words. Then, I opened my laptop and started writing. Chapter 1 of A Study in Scarlet, the first Sherlock Holmes novel. In this world, detective fiction at this level simply did not exist. No Sherlock, no Watson, no deductive reasoning laid out like a surgical demonstration. The genre was dominated by Japanese mystery novels, and nothing from China had ever challenged that. 4 days. That was all it took. The system's deep learning mode did not just help me memorize, it accelerated output, sharpening my focus into something surgical. I was not inventing from scratch. I was reconstructing from a lifetime of reading, adapting every detail to fit this world's timeline. I trimmed cultural references that did not exist here yet, adjusted the London geography to match what a modern Chinese reader could visualize, and landed on 90,000 words. 90,000 words in 4 days. My fingers ached. My back was stiff. But when I typed the final period, I felt something I had not felt in either lifetime. Not pride, certainty. This book would change everything. I called Tong Ching the moment I finished. Editor Tong, I have a new manuscript, a mystery novel, about 100,000 words, first in a series. Silence on the other end. Then, you wrote a 100,000-word novel during a school holiday? I had time, I said. She told me to send the manuscript. I did. And then I went back to posting stray birds poems and waiting. What I did not know was that when Tong Ching opened the file, she read straight through until 7 in the evening and missed her dinner plans with her best friend, Dong Lan. She was a PhD in literature from Fudan University, and she later told me that a study in Scarlet had completely changed her understanding of what mystery fiction could be. Editor-in-Chief Hu Wenbo called an emergency meeting. The verdict was unanimous. This was too good to serialize. They would publish it as a complete book. And then Tong Ching came to find me. She arrived in Lucheng on a Tuesday, with Dong Lan tagging along as her assistant. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Tong Ching was about 165, wearing all black, the kind of woman who looked like she edited manuscripts in her sleep. Dong Lan was taller, flashier, the type who drove a red Audi TT and dragged her workaholic friend to dinner by force. They sat down. Tong Ching studied me with the careful eyes of someone who had been expecting an adult and found a teenager. I really didn't expect you to be so young, she said. Seeing you, I feel like I've wasted years of my life. You work for one of the most respected literary magazines in the country at your age, I said. That's not a waste, she smiled. Then she got to business. 2 options. The first, a buyout. 1,000 yuan per 1,000 words. The whole book for 100,000 yuan, clean and simple. The copyright would no longer be mine. The second, royalties. 7% for the first 10,000 copies, 8% up to 30,000, 10% after that. Lower upfront income, but the ceiling was limitless. Only a fool would take the buyout. I knew what Sherlock Holmes was worth, not in this life, but in the last one. I had seen the movies, the BBC series, the merchandise, the cultural empire. In a world where none of that existed yet, I was holding a gold mine. I'll take the royalties, I said. Tong Ching's eyebrow went up. Most new authors grabbed the guaranteed money. A 17-year-old choosing the long game surprised her. I believe in my work, I said, and I believe in the market. She handed me the contract. I told her I would have my school's lawyers review it first. Her other eyebrow went up. Then she made the second offer. Become a contracted author for Mengya magazine. Priority submission rights, highest industry rates, full promotional support for any series I wanted to publish. I shook her hand. It's a pleasure doing business with you. That evening, I took them to a Shandong restaurant and ordered dishes I knew would impress. Sweet and sour pork, braised fish, stir-fried greens. I explained the history of Shandong cuisine, how Confucius himself had demanded precision in food preparation, and watched their expressions shift from polite interest to genuine astonishment. You're 17 and you know how to cook, and quote Confucius about food? Dong Lan said. A lot of boys in Shandong can cook, I said. You should try my work sometime. Later, in their hotel room, Dong Lan told Tong Ching, that kid isn't a child. He made the two of us. Graduates from 985 universities look like the young ones. Tong Ching agreed. She had come to Lucheng with doubts about whether a high schooler could really produce work this good. She left with none. Weeks passed. The Stray Birds poems gained a following on Weibo. Every night, a small but growing audience waited for the daily post. They called me a hidden gem, a literary giant. They demanded more updates. The account was building exactly the way I had planned, organically, quietly, one poem at a time. Then, the October issue of Mengya magazine hit shelves. The Gift of the Magi by Muzi, printed in clean black type on page 25. I received 3 commemorative copies at school. I was so absorbed in reading my own published words that I missed the class bell entirely. Yuan Yali found me in the mailroom. staring at the magazine like it might disappear if I blinked. "Is that your story?" she asked. I handed it to her. She read the byline, and her eyes lit up like I had handed her a trophy. "Come on," she said, grabbing my arm. "We're going to Director Zhang." "Teacher, class already started." She stopped, patted her forehead. "Right, go to class. Come find us after." Director Zhang held the magazine like it was a holy relic. "Our school is going to produce a great writer," he said, shaking his head. "This is really something." When the story went viral, the numbers shocked even Tong Qing. Magazine sales jumped 20%. A trending topic appeared on Weibo. "What do you think of The Gift of the Magi?" A professor from Yenching University wrote a public review, calling it a philosophy of happiness. My Weibo account got verified overnight. Rising star in Chinese literature, contracted author of Mengya magazine, author of The Gift of the Magi. Followers surged past 100,000, then 200,000, then kept climbing. My mother cried when she held the magazine, real tears running down her cheeks while she clutched it against her chest. "Mom, you've worked so hard all these years," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word because I was not just talking about this life. My father called his coworkers. His boss called him. Everyone called everyone. Zhang Shulan spent an entire hour on the phone telling relatives, friends, neighbors, and the woman who sold vegetables at the morning market. My father pretended to be above it all. Then I overheard him on his own phone. "Yes, it's Mengya magazine. My son did a great job." They looked at each other and burst out laughing. My father said, "Let's go out to celebrate. Liwen, have a couple of drinks with me tonight." "Okay, Dad." That was the first time he had ever asked me to drink with him, in this life or the last. Then, A Study in Scarlet went on sale, November 5th. 50,000 copies distributed to major cities nationwide. Shandong province put it in the most prominent display spot with a banner, "The new work of Mu Zi, a rising star writer from our province." It sold out in 3 days. 4,000 copies the first day, 7,000 the second, 35,000 the third, because word of mouth exploded. Readers were calling bookstores asking for copies that no longer existed. The printing plant went into emergency overtime. Tong Qing called me with the numbers. "Congratulations, Liwen. Your book is a huge success." I let out a breath I had been holding for 2 weeks. Even though I knew the book was brilliant, I had lived in a world where Sherlock Holmes was the most famous fictional detective in history. There had been a part of me that feared this world might not accept it. Different readers, different culture, different century. But some stories are universal. A genius detective, a loyal doctor, and a mystery that unfolds like a mathematical proof. It works everywhere, every time. The next day, a reporter from the Shanghai Daily arrived at my house. Li Shuying, early 30s, short black hair, black suit. The kind of journalist who read every book before the interview and asked questions that actually mattered. She had expected a middle-aged intellectual. She found a teenager drinking tea. "I still find your identity somewhat unreal," she said. "I read all your work before coming. I expected a returnee in his 30s with years of overseas experience." "The facts are right in front of you," I said. She paused. Then she smiled, because it was the kind of answer a 30-year-old would give. And that was the thing nobody could figure out about me. Not Tong Qing, not Director Zhang, not Yuan Yali. I was too composed, too strategic, too aware of how the world worked for someone who had only lived in it for 17 years. They called it genius. I called it pain. 14 extra years of failure is a hell of a teacher. We talked about craft, about inspiration, about why I chose Western settings. I told her I planned to write Chinese set stories eventually. Stories rooted in this country, this culture, this soil. She examined my bookshelf, pulled random volumes, and found handwritten notes in every one. Then, she asked what I would say to other young people. I leaned forward. "Some people say the college entrance exam is just one choice among many. I want to say something. That is complete nonsense." She blinked. "The college entrance exam is the most cost-effective way to change your life. For many families, it is the only way. I am a writer. My books sell in bookstores across the country, but my top priority right now is still my studies. Because education is not just about a career. It is about having the right to choose your own future." She wrote it all down, and when she left that evening, she quoted back to me the line I had given her over dinner. "Life is not just about the present hardships, but also about poetry and distant places." The interview ran the next day, alongside the first week sales report, 85,000 copies. The number hit the literary world like a thunderclap. Japanese mystery novels had dominated the Chinese market for years, and a debut novel by a Chinese teenager had just outsold most of them in 7 days. Then, they revealed my age, 17. Weibo exploded. Trending topics multiplied. Mu Zi, a 17-year-old genius writer. A Study in Scarlet. Sherlock Holmes, deductive reasoning. My follower count broke 1 million. By the end of the second week, Total sales hit 250,000 copies. 250,000. I let that number sink in. In my first life, I had worked construction for 200 yuan a day, waking at 5, breaking my body until sundown. Now, words I had written in 4 days were earning more per hour than my father made in a month. The People's Daily published an article using me as an example of the fighting spirit of youth in the new era. Director Zhang poured me tea in his office and asked me to sign his copy. How does it feel to be famous? He asked. Only my pen name is famous, I said. My real identity is still a secret. He nodded. That's wise. You're still young. Stay in the shadows a little longer. Principal Huang sent congratulations through Director Zhang. The school had protected my identity. No one outside the faculty knew that Muzi and Liwen were the same person. In the hallways, students talked about A Study in Scarlet without knowing the author sat 2 desks away. I signed Director Zhang's book and added 1 line underneath my name. Then I walked back to class, sat down at my desk, and opened my textbook. Because the preliminary royalty estimate was 150,000 yuan, and my mother had nearly fainted when I told her. In 2010, the average worker in China earned about 30,000 yuan a year. I had made 5 years of wages in 3 days. And when I mentioned that film and television adaptation rights could eventually bring in millions, both my parents went completely still. Several million? My father said. Your good days are yet to come, I told them. But I was not thinking about the money. I was thinking about what came next. The new concept writing competition semifinals were approaching. Stray Birds would be compiled into a book. The second Sherlock Holmes novel was already forming in my mind. And somewhere out there, 1 million readers were waiting for whatever Muzi would create next. I picked up my pen. The classroom was warm. Guo Wei was doodling in the margins of his notebook. Liu Yining was 3 rows ahead, her hair falling across the notebook where she was copying down my Stray Birds poems, though she did not know I could see. I was 17 years old, and the world was beginning to learn my name. Not the real one, not yet, but soon. By December, A Study in Scarlet had hit 1 million copies in a single month. 1 million. I had to sit with that number for a while before it felt real. In my first life, I had hauled concrete for 200 yuan a day. Now a single month of book sales had generated more money than my father would earn in 3 lifetimes. Tong Qing flew to Lucheng to deliver the news in person. I picked her up at the airport, and she shook my hand with the kind of grip that meant business was coming. Long time no see, Liwen, she said, studying me like she was still trying to reconcile the teenager in front of her with the voice on the page. At my apartment, she laid it out. 5 countries wanted overseas publishing rights: the United States, Britain, France, Japan, and a combined bid from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Detective fiction, it turns out, speaks every language. Mengya magazine would handle the international licensing on my behalf, and I would retain my core rights. I signed the authorization without hesitation. From now on, I said, I'm earning foreign exchange. Tong Qing gave me a look that said she was still not used to a 17-year-old talking like a trade negotiator. Then, she leaned back on the sofa and said, almost casually, by the way, did you enter the new concept writing competition? I laughed. She already knew the answer. One of the competition editors had recognized my name on the semi-finalist list and gone straight to her. You're a best-selling author with 1 million copies sold, she said. And you want to bully teenagers in an essay competition? I made the semi-finals on my own merit, I said. Besides, I have never been to Shanghai. She rolled her eyes, but she smiled. The overseas numbers arrived before the new year. 250,000 copies in the United States, 400,000 in Japan, 180,000 in Britain, 60,000 in France, 400,000 across Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Global sales, 2.9 million copies. The Japanese novelist Higashino Keigo publicly praised the book, calling it a unique achievement in the genre. But fame is a coin, and the ugly side was already showing. My Weibo had hit 3 million followers, all organic, not a single purchased account. And under every post, a growing chorus of critics had gathered. They called my work Western worship because the settings were British. They called me pretentious for posting Stray Birds poems. A cluster of self-appointed public intellectuals latched onto my account, using my comment section to push their own agenda, praising foreign governments, tearing down China. I had been called many things in 2 lifetimes, but a traitor was not going to be one of them. So I fired back. I posted a long Weibo explaining that every word of my work was my own, offering a 1 million yuan bounty to anyone who could prove ghostwriting. Then I addressed the real issue, the people who used criticism as a costume for contempt toward their own country. I am Chinese, I wrote. My ancestors were, I am, and I will be. I dismantled their arguments one by one. The myth about Qingdao's German drainage system, the logical impossibility of centenarians born after 1949, the double standards about democracy that conveniently forgot American political donations, Japanese chaebols, and the Australian genocide of indigenous peoples. The place where you stand is your China, I wrote. As you are, so is China. If you have light, China will not be dark. The post went viral. Trending topics multiplied. 3 official media outlets, The People's Daily, another People's Daily editorial, and Xinhua, published articles that clearly supported my position without naming me directly. But Principal Huang pulled me aside at school and gave me advice I did not want but needed. You are still young, Liwen. Arguing with anonymous people online will only lower your own standards. You don't even know if they're human. He was right. I deleted no posts, retracted nothing, but I stopped engaging. The trolls could shout into the void. I had an essay competition to win. Yuan Yali and I flew to Shanghai on a Thursday evening. Tongqing and Donglan met us at the airport, and we drove through the city I had never visited in either lifetime. The lights along the Bund reflected off the Huangpu River, and for a moment, I felt something I rarely allowed myself. Pure excitement. The next morning, I did my usual 5-kilometer run, came back to find Yuan Yali knocking on my hotel door with concern about my dark circles. I was too excited to sleep, I admitted. How about the exam? Nervous? Teacher Yuan, this is nothing to me. She raised an eyebrow. Yes, great writer. At 2:30 that afternoon, I sat down in the examination hall with 267 other competitors, 80 of us in Group A, current high school students. Some looked calm, some were pacing. One boy caught my attention. He sat alone in the corner, his school uniform spotless, his expression hollow, large eyes, but no light inside them. I noted him and moved on. The essay prompt was about loyalty, why it is valued above life itself. Write in any style. I did not hesitate. I wrote, The Death of Red Hair. It was a classical Chinese piece told through the voice of a court official about Guan Yu's legendary warhorse. After Guan Yu was captured and killed by Sun Quan, red hair was gifted to the general Ma Zhong, but the horse refused to eat. It starved itself to death rather than serve a new master. The official wept and told Sun Quan, even animals are like this. How can people bear it? And Sun Quan wept too, ordering a grand burial for Guan Yu, his son, and the horse. It was loyalty distilled into its purest form, not the loyalty of politics or oaths, but the loyalty of a creature that would rather die than betray. I wrote it in 30 minutes. Editor-in-chief Hu Wenbo was my proctor. He stood behind me and read every word over my shoulder. When I raised my hand to submit early, an hour into a 3-hour exam, he nodded without surprise. Another proctor read my essay afterward and turned to Hu Wenbo in shock. Tell me the truth. Did you leak the questions? Hu Wenbo nearly bit his head off. The judging panel was the most prestigious I had ever seen. Vice presidents from Yenching University and Fudan University, a doctoral supervisor from Jiangcheng University, the president of the China Writers Association. They had all come because they heard Muzi was competing. When the results were announced on Saturday, my name was first on the list. First prize, The Death of Red Hair by Liwen. Yuan Yali held the certificate and practically glowed. First prize in the National New Concept Writing Competition, the first ever from Lucheng City. You weren't this excited when my novel hit 1 million copies, I said. She swatted my arm. This is an official award. It's different. But before the ceremony ended, something else happened. Vice President Wen Shuwen of Fudan University had come specifically to recruit me. Tongqing arranged a coffee shop meeting, and Wen Shuwen laid out an offer that would have made any student in China weep with gratitude. Full scholarship, tuition waived, a private doctoral level room during my undergraduate years, complete creative freedom, the full backing of one of the country's top 3 universities. I listened carefully, respectfully, and then I said what I had to say. Principal Wen, thank you, but I want to try for Peking University. He blinked. Yuan Yali, sitting beside me, went very still. I don't want to leave any more regrets after 3 years of high school, I said. It was the truth. In my first life, Peking University had been an impossible dream, a name whispered by teachers about other people's children. Now I had a second chance. Fudan was excellent, but Peking University was the summit. I was climbing for the top this time. No shortcuts, no safety nets. Yuan Yali waited until we were alone to ask if I was sure. I told her I was. Go for it, young man, she said, and her eyes shone. No matter which university you choose, the important thing is to have no regrets. Back in Lucheng, winter break began. The snow came early, blanketing the schoolyard in white. On the last day of exams, I walked out of the classroom and wandered the grounds, watching students hurl snowballs at each other, their laughter carrying across the frozen air. On the way home, I found Liu Yining crouched by a flower bed near the school gate. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Shh." She pointed into the bushes. A tiny kitten, gray, shivering, barely old enough to survive alone, was curled in the snow. We bought milk from a nearby shop. We named her Nianian after the phrase, "May you have abundance every year." I took her home because Liu Yining's mother, a university professor and a strict woman, would never allow a pet. Liu Yining followed me home to help carry the supplies. My parents saw her and exchanged a look I pretended not to notice. My mother's voice got warmer. My father's posture relaxed. When Liu Yining said goodbye, she promised to visit Nianian again soon. And then, on the walk back from seeing her off, Shi Qingqing was waiting at the entrance to my neighborhood. She stood under a streetlight, biting her lip. "You and Liu Yining are together? What does this have to do with you?" I stepped past her. In my first life, Shi Qingqing had been the girl who kept me on a string, close enough to hope, far enough to control. I had wasted months on her. This time, I saw through it the moment she appeared. She had not come because she cared. She had come because I was famous. "Liwen, I was wrong," she said. "Please don't be angry." I looked at her and genuinely did not understand. Wrong about what? We had never been anything. She had made sure of that. "We're not friends anymore," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Okay," I said. She ran. I felt nothing. Not cruelty, just clarity. The 31-year-old in me had no patience for games, and the 17-year-old had better things to protect. Meanwhile, a quiet conversation had been happening on my computer screen for weeks. Di Yang, the hollow-eyed boy from the competition. Since we exchanged QQ numbers in Shanghai, he had slowly opened up. His parents were locked in a divorce that neither wanted to finalize, not out of love, but out of spite. His father drank and hit him when he refused to choose sides. His mother played mahjong all day and had stopped answering the school's calls. His homeroom teacher, Teacher Zhang, was the only adult who still tried, but even she had been told by her vice principal to stop meddling. One night, a message came through. My parents fought again today. Then they started talking about divorce. My dad asked me who I wanted to live with. I didn't answer, so he hit me. "What should I do, Wenzi?" I stared at the screen. In my first life, I had been the kid who broke, the one who enlisted in the army because there was nothing left to stay for. I recognized the tone in Di Yang's messages. Not anger, not sadness, but exhaustion. The kind that comes when you have been drowning so long you forget what air tastes like. "Why don't you find Teacher Zhang and move out?" I typed. "I don't want to trouble her anymore. She's already helped me so much." I invited him to visit me after the new year. He sent a smiley face and said he would think about it. Before he logged off, I wrote one last thing. Life will never be as good as we imagine, but it will never be as bad as we imagine either. Whether it's good or bad, we must be strong. I meant every word. But sitting in my warm room with Nianian purring on my lap, I could hear how hollow those words must have sounded to a boy whose father beat him for silence. The royalties arrived the week before Spring Festival. Tongqing called with the final number, 9,640,000 yuan after tax. Global sales had reached 3.4 million copies, 9,640,000. I was standing on a commercial street when she told me. I had to find a bench and sit down because my legs went soft. Not from joy, from vertigo. The distance between my first life and this one had just become a canyon I could no longer see across. I bought 12 cases of premium liquor and had them delivered to our apartment. My father came home, saw the boxes, and raised an eyebrow. "The royalties came in," I said. "You like drinking. I bought you something decent." He looked at me, then he patted my shoulder, just once, and said, "Come on, let's move them upstairs." Spring Festival arrived like it always does in Shandong. Early mornings, new clothes, firecrackers at midnight, and dumplings at 5 in the morning. My mother made chive and pork filling, the kind that steams the whole kitchen. My father lit the long string of firecrackers on the street at midnight, and I watched the sparks dissolve into the winter sky. At my uncle's house on New Year's Day, the family gathered for the reunion dinner. My eldest aunt, the one who loved comparing children, asked my mother if I could get into a good university, suggesting that her daughter, Li Qian, could tutor me. My mother had been waiting for this moment. "Liwen scored almost 700 points this semester," she said, raising her voice so the entire room could hear. "Third in the grade. His homeroom teacher says he has a strong chance at Tsinghua or Peking University." Silence. Every relative at the table stared. My eldest aunt's expression froze, then cracked into an awkward laugh. My uncle quickly changed the subject. From across the room, my cousin Li Lifeng gave me a silent thumbs up. I sat in the corner, eating sunflower seeds, watching the adults perform the annual ritual of pride and envy that every Chinese family knows by heart. My mother was glowing. My father was pretending he did not care, which was how he always looked when he was most proud. It was warm. It was safe. It was everything I had lost in my first life, and everything I would fight to keep in this one. But that night, after the firecrackers died and the house went quiet, I opened QQ one last time. De Yang had not messaged in 3 days. I typed, "Happy New Year, Brother Yang. How are you doing?" No reply. I stared at the screen for a long time. Nianian climbed into my lap and pressed her head against my hand. Outside, someone's leftover firework whistled into the sky and burst into red sparks that faded almost instantly. I closed the laptop, but I did not close the worry. Something was coming. I could feel it the way soldiers feel weather, not in the sky, but in the bones. A pressure, a silence where sound should be. De Yang was 19 years old. He had no family that wanted him, no one who checked in except a retired homeroom teacher and a stranger he met at an essay competition. I told myself I would call him tomorrow. I told myself it would be enough. But somewhere in Tianjin, a boy was staring at a ceiling in a dark room, and no one in the world was staring back. By February, my second royalty payment had landed in my account, and I knew exactly what to do with it. I drove to the Mingjian Mingju sales office on a Tuesday morning. The average housing price in Lucheng hovered around 8,500 yuan per square meter, but this development, a villa complex in the heart of the city, opened at 12,000. In my first life, I had watched property prices in this exact neighborhood triple by 2019. I was not guessing. I was buying a future. The sales floor was chaos. A small army of middle-aged women had descended on the place, not to buy houses, but to collect the free eggs the developers handed out for tours. From a distance, it looked like a polite riot. I stood near the entrance, waiting for someone to help me, and eventually, a saleswoman with long legs and a professional smile walked over. "Hello, I'm Huang Yue," she said. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to see your largest unit." She blinked. I could see the calculation in her eyes. Teenager, no car, probably here for the eggs. But she walked me to the showroom anyway, and I liked her for that. The flagship unit was 218 square meters, 4 bedrooms, a balcony with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning sun in a way that made the bare concrete glow. I stood in that light and saw it clearly. My parents sitting on a proper sofa, in a proper living room, in a home they owned. Not rented, not borrowed, theirs. "How much?" I asked. After negotiation, the final price came to 2,760,000 yuan, including the garage. I placed my ID card and bank card on the table. "Full payment," I said. "Swipe the card." Huang Yue froze. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I tapped the table gently. "Miss Huang, is there a problem?" Her voice trembled. "Mr. Li, are you sure you want to pay in full?" I smiled. "I'm sure." She practically ran to process the paperwork. While I waited, my aunt and cousin, Li Xian, walked past the VIP room carrying eggs, spotted me, and stopped dead. "Liwen, are you here to collect eggs for your mother?" "Not exactly," I said. "I'm buying the house." The silence that followed was worth more than the villa. My parents took it better than I expected. My father, a construction man to his bones, immediately started planning the renovation himself. My mother's only concern was the money, but when I told her the investment logic, buy now, triple the value later, she nodded like she had always understood real estate. I hired professional designers. My father was in charge of the build. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents plan a home that was actually big enough for all of us. The kitchen my mother had always wanted. The study I would fill with books. A room for Nianian. Everything was golden. 5 more countries signed import deals for A Study in Scarlet. Global sales climbed past 5 million copies. Tongqing called with updates almost daily, and each call ended with bigger numbers. I wrote The Sign of 4 in a week, 89,000 words, the second Sherlock Holmes novel, polished and sent to Shanghai before the ink was dry. I used 1,000 system points on a lucky draw, and the literary works that emerged, Hamlet, Don Quixote, 100 Years of Solitude, No Longer Human, To Live, felt less like prizes and more like prophecies. I was 17. I was a millionaire. I was buying a villa with cash and writing novels that sold in 10 countries. In any story, this would be the peak. It was. On March 20th, I returned to school for a monthly exam. Afterward, Yuan Yali called me to her office. She closed the door. She sat down. Her face was wrong. "Liwen, please have a seat," she said. "Do you remember De Yang?" My heart seized before my brain caught up. "I remember," I said. "We were still in contact on QQ before the new year." "He's dead," The word hit the room like a brick through glass. I gripped the edge of her desk. My voice came out hoarse. Teacher Yuan, what did you say? Teacher Zhang contacted me. Yang committed suicide by jumping from his school building on March 10th. March 10th, 10 days ago. He had been dead for 10 days, and I had been buying villas and writing novels and counting royalties while his body was already ash. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. The soldier's training held even when everything else cracked. I found D Yang's QQ. His profile picture was black. The last message in our chat was mine, sent before Spring Festival. Keep going, bro. Everything will be all right. He never replied. He was already gone when I typed those words. Already falling. Already decided. Everything will be all right. What a thing to say to a boy standing on the edge of a 5th floor window. Yuan Yali was watching me carefully, the way you watch someone who might shatter. Liwen, he left you a gift. Teacher Zhang sent it. She handed me a package. Inside was a book. Mr. Toad Goes to See a Psychologist. Worn at the corners, the spine cracked from rereading, and a letter. I unfolded it slowly. His handwriting was small and careful, the kind of penmanship that comes from someone trying not to take up too much space. Wednesday, by the time you open this letter, I may have already left this world. Please don't grieve too much for me, because what is about to happen may be a relief. He wrote that he was tired, that he had once had a carefree childhood, laughter, innocence, fragments of beauty that became the only things worth remembering. But somewhere along the way, all of it faded, replaced by pain. Perhaps if I had never possessed it, I wouldn't be in so much pain. He wrote that he felt like an abandoned nuisance, that he did not want to be a burden anymore, that he did not want Teacher Zhang to grow haggard because of him. And then, at the bottom, in handwriting that did not tremble, thank you, Wenzi. Thank you for being there for me during this difficult time. The book has been with me for a very long time. If it weren't for it, I wouldn't have been able to stick with it for so long. I am giving him to you now, hoping that your future will not be like mine. I closed my eyes. The letter shook in my hands. In my first life, I had been the boy who broke, the one who enlisted because there was nothing left to stay for. I understood the exhaustion Di Yang described, the kind that goes past tiredness and into something hollow, where even breathing feels like an obligation you never agreed to. I had gotten my second chance. Di Yang did not get his. Teacher Yuan, I'm going to Tianjin, I said, to see him off. Liwen, I've made up my mind. Don't tell my parents. Outside the school gate, my phone rang. Tongqing. Teacher Yuan told me, she said. I've booked the next flight to Lucheng. Once I arrive, we go to Tianjin together. Don't refuse. I did not refuse. 6 hours later, she landed. We rented a car and drove through the night. The highway was dark. The radio was playing something I cannot remember. Tongqing asked me what kind of person Di Yang was, and I told her. The anxiety, the confusion, the boy whose parents fought for custody, not out of love, but out of spite. The boy who only felt wanted when he was being used as a weapon in their war. He told me something once, I said, my eyes on the road ahead. He said, if you don't like him, why did you bring him into this world? Tongqing did not speak. And then he said, I'm sorry for being born. The car swerved. Hazard lights. Tongqing pulled over, turned my face toward hers, and stared at me. Her eyes were frightened. Liwen, none of this is your fault. I know, I said, but the words sounded thin. We arrived in Tianjin past midnight. The next morning, we found Teacher Zhang's apartment, an old building with ivy crawling up the walls and plaster peeling at the corners. She opened the door, looking 10 years older than when I had last seen her. She had been suspended from her job for getting too involved in Di Yang's case. You've got a kind heart, child, she said. She told us how it happened, a Thursday. She was preparing lessons when she heard a commotion outside. A student came to tell her someone had jumped from the 5th floor. When she reached the scene, they told her it was her former student. He had left a suicide note. Only in high school can I feel my own breath. Since a person comes into the world naked, I choose to leave naked. He had jumped naked. His clothes were folded neatly beside the note on the classroom desk, uniform pressed, shoes aligned, as if even in his final act, he was trying not to make a mess for someone else to clean up. Teacher Zhang covered her face with both hands. The teacup trembled in its saucer. Tongqing quietly handed her a tissue. I said nothing for a long time. There was nothing to say that would not sound obscene next to that silence. We visited his home next. The apartment was empty. His parents had divorced the day after his death and moved out. The neighbor, an old man who had watched Di Yang grow up, told us the truth. Neither parent had ever wanted the child. They had stayed married only because one of them would have been stuck with custody. When Di Yang turned 18 and enrolled in college, the divorce was back on the table. They fought over who would not keep him. Tell me, the old man said, shaking his head. How can there be such parents? I remembered Di Yang's letter. I feel like an abandoned nuisance, someone no one wants. He had not been imagining it. It was the truth. I sat in a coffee shop that afternoon and asked Tong Qing the question that had been burning through me since the highway. What is the purpose of life? She thought carefully. People live for themselves and for the people who love them. And if no one loves you? I asked. If the people who made you wish they hadn't? If the world you were born into treats you like a mistake? She had no answer for that. Neither did I. But Di Yang had tried to give one in his own terrible way. He had answered the question by stepping off a building. His answer was that life without love is not life at all. I refused to accept that answer. I found one, not an answer, but a direction. Through Tong Qing's connections, we met Professor Chu Yun, a psychiatry specialist at Tianjin Medical University. She gave me numbers that made the coffee go cold in my hands. Less than 5% of depressed people in China sought treatment. 90% received no medical help at all. Suicide was the second leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 29, and depression accounted for 40% of those deaths. 40%. Di Yang was a statistic, and the system that failed him was not broken. It was functioning exactly as designed. Nobody cared enough to fix it. Professor Q, I said, I'm going to write a book about this, but it will not be gentle. It will not be comforting. I want people to feel what despair actually is. She studied me for a long moment. I hope this novel can help society understand depression. I looked at Tong Qing. My next book will be different, more extreme. On the drive back, I told her what I meant. A person dies 3 times. The first, when the body stops. The second, at the funeral, when society erases the name. The third, when the last person who remembers them forgets. Di Yang had already died twice. I would make sure the third death came as late as possible. This is what Di Yang wanted to tell us, I said. I'm sorry for being born as a human being. Tong Qing turned her face to the window. In the dim light of passing headlights, I could see her jaw was tight. After returning to Lucheng, I locked myself in my room. I did not come out for 7 days, not for conversation, not for sunlight, not for the sound of my mother's voice calling through the door, only for meals and the bathroom, brief, mechanical exits where I walked past my parents like a ghost, eyes focused on nothing, answering questions in single syllables. My mother tried to catch my gaze every time. I looked through her. I sat at my desk with a stack of blank paper and a pen, and I wrote, not on a computer, by hand. Every word pressed into the page like a wound. The system had given me the framework. The original, no longer human, lived in my memory, like all the other literary works. But what I wrote was not a copy. It was a rewrite. I stripped out everything that did not fit this world and poured in everything Di Yang had taught me about what it means to be unwanted. The book was called No Longer Human. It was not fiction. It was a scream dressed in prose. The story of a man named Yozo who sees through the hypocrisy of the world so completely that he cannot bear to participate in it. A man who smiles because he is afraid, who drinks because he cannot feel, who lets himself be destroyed because he believes he does not deserve to be saved. I wrote Di Yang into every page, his hollow eyes, his folded clothes, his apology for being born. Outside my door, my parents were falling apart. My mother wanted to call an ambulance. She paced the hallway. She pressed her ear to the door. She whispered to my father that something was seriously wrong. My father pulled her aside. Calm down, he said. Liwen said he doesn't want to be disturbed. He has his own plans. 7 words. That was all he gave her, but they held. Because my father understood something my mother could not, that some things have to be finished before they can be explained. That the boy behind that door was not breaking. He was building. Tong Qing stayed with my parents for the full 7 days. She slept on our couch. She held my mother's hand when the silence from my room became unbearable. She did not knock, not once. On the 7th day, the apartment was silent. My mother sat on the couch, staring at my door. Tong Qing sat beside her, holding her hand. My father stood by the window, pretending to read a newspaper he had already finished twice. Then the handle turned. I opened the door. I was thinner. My eyes were dry and raw. My fingers were cramped from gripping the pen for 100 hours straight. In my hands was a stack of handwritten pages, 70,000 words, written in 7 days, 10,000 words a day, every character inked by hand, because Di Yang's story deserved to be felt, not typed. Mom, I'm a little hungry, I said. Can you get me something to eat? My mother practically flew to the kitchen, muttering, "It's good that you're out. It's good that you're out." I sat on the sofa and handed the manuscript to Tong Qing. She opened it, read the title, No Longer Human. She began to read. After a while, her hands started trembling. Her eyes went red. She raised her head and stared at me without saying a word. My father, alarmed, leaned forward. Xiao Tong, what's wrong? Why are you looking at him like that? Tong Qing shook her head. Her voice was hoarse. It's okay, uncle and aunt. Then she turned to me. Your book is a bit too extreme. I looked at her. This is what Diyang wanted to tell us. She held the manuscript against her chest, stood up, and said she would leave for Shanghai immediately. At the Mengya editorial office, the same scene repeated itself. Editor-in-chief Hu read it and slammed his desk so hard the editors outside jumped. He went out to smoke for the first time in years, eyes bloodshot. Then the senior editors read it one by one, each emerging quieter than the last. The entire office fell silent. A room full of professionals who had read thousands of books, brought to a standstill by a handwritten manuscript from a 17-year-old. One editor asked Tong Qing the question they were all thinking. Is Muzi's mental state all right? Because the authors who write with this much empathy are usually not okay. I have no mental problems, I told Tong Qing on the phone that night. I'm perfectly normal. If you sense anything wrong, you have to tell me. I will. How did the editorial department react? She laughed, the first real laugh I had heard from her in weeks. Editor-in-chief Hu said your book almost drove his entire department to depression. We released No Longer Human on April 10th, exactly 1 month after Diyang died. I posted a Weibo tribute explaining the book's origin, my friend's depression, his suicide, the statistics I had learned from Professor Chu. 40% of suicides caused by depression, 90% untreated. I asked people to pay attention to mental health, to family trauma, to school bullying. May my friend find peace, I wrote, and may his passing awaken greater awareness. The book sold 100,000 copies in 24 hours, 300,000 in 48 hours, 1 million in the first week. The cover alone told you what you were walking into. A deep black background, blood-red title, a figure sitting alone in a chair, leaning back, hands hanging at his sides, a beam of light from the window that never reached him, as if even brightness could not dispel the darkness around him. Readers wept in bookstores. Editors at rival publishers went quiet. Parents panicked, because the book was terrifying, not in the way of horror novels, in the way of truth. It tore open the reality that polite society had agreed to ignore, and some people did not want it torn open. 10 days after release, reports surfaced. A girl in Hubei had a breakdown after reading it. A group of depressed teenagers in Shanxi had been planning a joint suicide, but one of them bought No Longer Human, read it, changed his mind, and called the police. He saved 3 lives. Parents demanded the book be banned. Critics called it dangerous. The internet split in half. Tong Qing called, furious on my behalf. I laughed. I expected this, I said. What did Editor-in-Chief Hu say? He said not to worry. He and President Wang have spoken with the authorities. From the feedback, there's no issue. The book raises legitimate awareness. Someone is stirring controversy behind the scenes. Jealousy, not genuine concern. Jealousy, I repeated. 1.5 million copies in 10 days. 150,000 a day. Of course they're jealous. The storm passed. The book was not banned. The Shandong Writers Association scrambled to recruit me before Shanghai could. National mental health awareness, for the first time in my memory, entered mainstream conversation, not because of a policy paper or a government directive, but because of a 17-year-old's grief. But I was already somewhere else, already past the pain. On a dirt road in rural Guangxi, I was trudging through mud toward a village that did not appear on most maps. Donglan walked behind me, falling every few minutes, cursing under her breath. Who told you to come? I said. I said I could go alone. You heartless brat. I followed you because I was worried. After what you put everyone through, someone had to watch you. I smiled. She was not wrong. The village was called Wangjia. The woman I had come to find was 109 years old. Her name was Grandma He. She had survived famine, war, the death of every sibling, the death of her husband, the loss of a son, and a 2-year-old daughter. She had lived through every catastrophe the 20th century could produce, and she was still alive, still sitting in her doorway, still breathing. I sat beside her and listened, and in the spaces between her words, in the pauses where memory became too heavy for language, I began to hear the answer to the question that had haunted me since the highway to Tianjin. What is the purpose of life? People live for the sake of living itself, not for money, not for fame, not for the approval of parents who never wanted you, just for the stubborn, unreasonable act of continuing. Diyang could not find that reason, but I would find it for him. I would write it into a book so clear, so devastating, so full of endurance that no one who read it could pretend the question did not matter. The book would be called To Live. Donglan caught up to me on the mountain path, breathing hard, mud on her shoes. Liwen, what exactly are you writing? I looked at the green hills ahead, the white streams cutting through the valley, the farmers bending over rice paddies in the distance. A story about about someone who survives everything, I said, and keeps going. She studied my face. Whatever she saw there made her stop asking questions. We had 6 villages to visit, 6 centenarians to interview, a 30-day journey across some of the poorest, most remote places in the country. But for the first time since March 10th, I could breathe. Not easily, not fully, but enough. Yang was gone. His parents had erased him in a day, divorced, moved out, scattered like they had never had a son. But I carried his letter in my bag, and his book sat on my desk at home, and his words lived in 70,000 handwritten characters that 1 million people had already read. He would not be forgotten. That was the least I could give him. And to live, the answer to his question, was coming. I came back from Guangxi a different person. 30 days across 6 provinces, 6 centenarians, 6 lifetimes of suffering distilled into conversations held in doorways and beneath persimmon trees with people who had outlived wars, famines, revolutions, and the deaths of everyone they ever loved. Their stories lived in my notebook, and Yang's letter still sat in my bag, and the first draft of To Live was already taking shape in my head, a novel about a man who loses everything and keeps breathing. But first, there were numbers to face. Tong Qing met me at Donglan's apartment in Shanghai. Donglan had already left for England, 4 years of business studies, a note on the bedside table, and a house key by the television. Classic Donglan. She told me the flight was the day after tomorrow, then left the morning before. I shook my head and kept her key. Tong Qing sat across from me with a stack of papers and the expression she wore when the numbers were about to hurt. First, she said, global cumulative sales of A Study in Scarlet have hit 6 million copies. The leadership believes the book has reached its ceiling. Steady growth from here. So we're releasing The Sign of 4 on June 1st. Any objections? None. Second, No Longer Human has been cleared by the authorities. The official verdict, the social issues were caused by society's neglect of mental health, not by your book. I picked up my teacup and raised it toward her. This is worth celebrating, sister. Dinner's on me tonight. She was not finished. No Longer Human has sold 2 million copies. Nationwide shortage. Booksellers are literally blocking our door with cash, saying they won't leave until they get stock. I blinked. 2 million? In a little over a month? She nodded. Then she told me the royalties. 15.9 million yuan from A Study in Scarlet. 5.3 million from No Longer Human. 11.6 million to be deposited in early June. My head went light. I had to ask her to slow down. She smiled. Don't get dizzy. Think about how to spend it and prepare your new book. I told her the truth. I'll write this one slowly, half a year, maybe more, because this novel is going after the Mao Dun Literature Prize. Her eyebrows rose. The highest award in Chinese literature and the Kafka Prize, I said. That one's a bellwether for the Nobel. She studied me. So confident? I have to be. On June 1st, The Sign of 4, released in mainland China. The internet exploded. Sherlock Holmes fans, who had been furious about the delay, cursing me for prioritizing No Longer Human, suddenly forgave everything. Comments flooded my Weibo. You scoundrel, you finally remembered Holmes. And good, they're back. They're all back. I blocked 100 accounts and went back to writing. The book traveled fast. A Chinese student in England posted that he had bought 10 copies and shipped them to British classmates who were translating it word by word with software. Japanese readers discovered the series and demanded synchronized release dates. The Sign of 4 sold 130,000 copies on its first day. Then, Tong Qing called with the number that changed everything. Fox News in America wants to adapt your Sherlock Holmes series. How much? Guess. $2 million? She laughed. 8 million for A Study in Scarlet alone, plus priority adaptation rights to the entire series. A-level project. $8 million. At the 2011 exchange rate, that was 58 million yuan. I swallowed hard. The depression from writing No Longer Human and researching To Live, all those months of grief and darkness, evaporated in a single phone call. I am not proud of that, but I am honest about it. By July, Mengia released the official count. 12.2 million copies sold worldwide across 3 books. I was the youngest author in the world to cross 10 million. The announcement went nuclear. British tabloids invented a rumor that I was dating Emma Watson. A Japanese paper called me the young dragon of the empire. A Korean newspaper claimed I had Korean blood. They had all gone mad. And the one question nobody could answer, who is Muzi, became the loudest sound on the internet. Then CCTV called. Face to Face, the most watched interview program in the country. They wanted me, the mystery of Muzi, the biggest unsolved question in Chinese publishing. 285 days since I first published The Gift of the Magi, and nobody outside my inner circle knew who was behind the pen name. Some online theorists claimed Muzi was actually a team of writers. Impossible, they said, for one person to write detective novels and literary fiction this different. Others swore I was a government asset from some shadowy dragon group. The speculation was getting more absurd by the week. I said yes, not because I wanted fame, because I was about to take the college entrance exam, and the timing let me control the narrative. If the world was going to learn my identity, I wanted them to learn it alongside the words 18-year-old student, education first, writer second. The CCTV crew arrived at my home for a 3-day shoot. Reporter Gu Bing shook my hand and laughed. "You're not the Muzi I imagined," she said. "I expected thin, pale, glasses, long hair, melancholic. I love basketball," I told her. The school even wanted me on the team. The cameras followed me through my daily routine. Gu Bing asked about the pen name, and I told her the truth. I split my surname Li into its 2 components, Mu and Z, one night before bed. Nothing poetic, just a teenager being lazy with Chinese characters. She asked why I hid my identity. "Because I'm a student first," I said. I wasn't prepared for the spotlight. Writing brought me material rewards, yes, but under constant attention, I'd lose my composure and my motivation to create. Why should people focus on me when they could focus on the books? She asked about To Live. I showed her the handwritten manuscripts, the drafts of No Longer Human, and the first draft of the new novel, stacks of paper covered in my handwriting, 4 revisions deep. "Both books confront death," she said, "but one is about despair, and the other is about hope. And they're written by the same person, an 18-year-old boy." I told her about Grandma He, 109 years old, born in 1903, survived every catastrophe the 20th century could produce. I told her about the 6 centenarians across 6 provinces, about Di Yang's question and the answer I was trying to write. "The purpose of discussing death," I said, "is ultimately to help the living live better." On July 20th, the episode aired. Title: Liwen, the literary journey of an 18-year-old. My mother sat in front of the television before it even started, shooing my father into the living room like a general marshalling troops. Old Lee, it's starting. Son, come quick, have some fruit." My father sat down with the quiet dignity of a man, pretending he was not excited. He was very excited. The voiceover opened with the number, 12.2 million copies. And then the camera cut to me, sitting in my study, sunlight through the window, bookshelves behind me, 426 books, every one of them read, every one of them noted. And then the host said it, the sentence that 285 days of mystery had been building toward. Muzi, whose real name is Liwen, comes from Lucheng in Shandong province and is currently a student at Lucheng No. 2 Middle School, an 18-year-old high school student. That was the answer. The most famous anonymous writer in China was a teenager who loved basketball and had never been to college. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father leaned forward. I looked at my own face on the screen and thought, well, there goes the quiet life. Within 10 minutes, my name hit the trending topics. Within 20, my phone was vibrating so hard it walked itself off the table. My QQ class group chat exploded. Holy crap, Muzi is Liwen. 99 plus messages before I even opened it. The trending topics stacked up. Number 1, Muzi's real face. Number 3, Muzi is really 18. Number 5, face-to-face interview. Number 20, you are the root of all things. Love is the best answer to all problems. I posted a short message on Weibo, gratitude, a promise to keep writing. Then I closed the app and went back to revising To Live. The reveal shattered my quiet life. 2 weeks of non-stop interviews, reporters everywhere. Leaders from the Municipal Federation of Literary and Art Circles showed up at my house with signed books, wanting photos. The Writers Association recruited me. I joined the municipal chapter and the provincial chapter in the same week. But the real work was happening behind the cameras. Tong Qing and President Wang arranged for Shanghai Translation Publishing House to build me a 5-person professional team. Cao Jianlin, a burly, slightly balding former bodybuilder who happened to be a brilliant chief editor, would lead it. 2 assistants, Sun Jifei and Wang Shufa, for daily operations. A translator named Sun Shangling with a PhD and fluency in 6 languages. An operations manager named Gu Wenping, a Peking University graduate with stars in her eyes when she talked about No Longer Human. I gathered them at my new Shanghai apartment, the one I had bought on the banks of the Huangpu River for 5.2 million yuan, which I calculated would be worth 20 million by 2024. I cooked them 8 Shandong dishes. Skills from a lonely past life finally paying off. Over dinner, I laid out the plan. I've already been accepted to Peking University through guaranteed admission, but I'm still taking the college entrance exam. Until then, studying comes first. No new books, no distractions. Then the phone rang. "Hello, I am Jia Zhangke." I hung up. He called back. I hung up again. He called a third time, a fourth. Gu Wenping cleared her throat and mentioned that she knew of a director by that name. Silence around the table. I answered the phone. It was indeed Jia Zhangke, the Jia Zhangke, master of Chinese art house cinema, the director behind Xiao Wu. He wanted to adapt No Longer Human into a film. We met at a coffee shop the next day. He told me what drew him to the material, his lifelong obsession with the lives of marginalized people, the broken souls fighting against fate. He pitched his vision, Yozo's childhood shadows, the toxic friendship with Horiki, the double suicide, the assault that destroys the last light. I shook my head. It won't pass censors. Let me suggest something different. We spent weeks on that script. Same style, different story. 2 marginalized people who redeem each other. A man alive, but wanting to die. A woman trapped in a beautiful cage of family expectation and domestic abuse. The theme was no longer human, but the essence was that humanity has character. 4 drafts, 4 rejections from me. Jia Zhangke cursed me out on the 5th. "If you say it's no good one more time, I'm done. Let whoever wants this job have it." I laughed. This draft is fine. The budget settled at 28 million yuan. Huaying invested 20 million. Jia Zhangke put in 3 million. I put in 5 of my own money, 5 million yuan. My mother nearly needed to be hospitalized when she heard. My father shook his head and muttered something about his son being either a genius or insane. But I believed in the project, not as a businessman, but as a writer who owed Di Yang's story the best possible telling. If someone was going to put his pain on screen, I needed to be in the room when they did it. My team would oversee production while I focused on what came next. Meanwhile, To Live was taking everything I had. 76 days of writing, 4 full drafts. On August 15th, I put down the pen and stared at the final manuscript, a story about a man named Fugi who loses his parents, his son, his daughter, his wife, his son-in-law, and his grandson, one by one, over decades, and keeps living, not because he wants to, because living is what people do. Tongqing read it twice before she spoke. Like No Longer Human, it's about death, but this one is about hope. She took the manuscript back to Shanghai. The editorial office went quiet again, the same silence that No Longer Human had created, except this time, the tears were different, not despair, sorrow, the kind that makes you want to call your parents and tell them you love them. The college entrance exam. We celebrated Spring Festival as a full family for the first time since my grandparents died. Uncles, aunts, cousins, everyone packed into our new villa, eating dumplings, watching the Spring Festival gala, arguing about which sketch was the funniest. My cousin Li Lefeng cornered me in the hallway and stared at me like I was an alien. "Fourth brother, tell me the truth. Are you possessed? Are you a ghost?" I chased him through the house until he apologized. It felt normal, warm, the kind of ordinary that a reborn man with 12 million books in circulation does not take for granted. Then the holiday ended and the work began. I returned to Lucheng and locked myself into a study routine that would have killed me in my first life. 15 hours a day, minimum. Yuan Yali sent over exam papers. The system helped me build knowledge frameworks across all 6 subjects: Chinese, math, English, politics, history, geography, connecting every concept to its historical roots, turning abstract patterns into visible structures. My parents begged me to rest. "You've already been accepted to Peking University. You don't need to work this hard." I did not listen. In my first life, I never took this exam. I enlisted instead, ran away from education, ran away from everything. This time, I would finish what I started. That was the promise. Mock exams, 665 points. Not bad for someone who had spent half his senior year writing bestsellers and traveling the country. The real exam arrived in June. Reporters camped outside the venue like it was a celebrity premiere. I walked past them without a word, sat down at my desk, and opened the test booklet. For 2 days, I answered questions with the calm of a 31-year-old and the knowledge of a system-enhanced 18-year-old. Math was harder than expected. Everything else felt right. On the drive home, I passed Lucheng No. 2 Middle School and saw the banner, "Maintain a stable mindset. Go all out. Leave no regrets." "Mom," I said, "do you remember what I told you when I started high school? I said I'd never let you down." Her eyes went red. "No matter how you do, your parents will never be disappointed in you. But I would be disappointed in myself, Mom. That's why I'm here." Results day, June 20th. I sat in front of the computer at 10 in the morning. The website crashed. It crashed again and again. For For over an hour, the entire province hammered the same server into the ground. At 11:13, I finally got through, entered my admission ticket number, stared at the screen. My score was hidden, blocked, but the system displayed a single line. Your ranking has entered the top 50 in the province. Please check details on the 27th. When the full results came on the 27th, 667 points, 13th in Shandong province. Not first, not even close to first. The top spots belonged to students who had spent their entire lives doing nothing but preparing for this exam. I had written 4 best-selling novels, traveled 6 provinces, invested in a film, built a professional team, and appeared on national television during that same period. 13th was extraordinary. 13th was enough. The internet disagreed, of course. Half the comments celebrated me. The other half asked how a guy with a cheat system only managed 13th place. I did not engage. Both sides were right, and neither side knew the full story. Tong Qing moved fast. She timed the release of To Live to ride the wave of my exam results. The genius who conquered both literature and academics. 5 book signing events across Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shandong, and Qingdao. The publicity machine roared to life. But before that, I had one thing left to do. I got my driver's license in 2 days, an absurdly fast timeline made possible by a traffic police detachment that wanted signed books and photographs. I paid the toll in autographs and handshakes. Then, I called the Mercedes-Benz dealership in Lucheng. I'd like to order a G500. The salesperson's voice went up half an octave. Of course, sir. When would you like to come in? I test drove it that afternoon. V8 engine, twin turbocharged, 421 horsepower. The thing roared like it was angry at the road for existing. 2.2 million yuan with the configuration I wanted. 6-month wait for delivery. In my first life, I saved up for a BYD Chin. Now, I was ordering a Mercedes G-Class and telling the saleswoman not to rush. Standing in the dealership parking lot, I called my mother. Mom, I ordered a car. How much? I told her. The line went quiet for a very long time. Liwen, she finally said. You'd better not be gambling. I laughed all the way home. High school was over. The books were written. The team was built. The film was in production. The exam was passed. And to live, the answer to Di Yang's question, the philosophy of Grandma He, the story of a man who survives everything and keeps going, was about to meet the world. The prodigy chapter of my life was finished. Whatever came next would require something bigger than talent. It would require becoming the person the talent demanded. To Live released on June 28th, one day after my exam score went public. 667 points, 13th in Shandong province. The internet could not decide whether that was brilliant or disappointing, and I did not care. Tong Qing had timed the release perfectly. The genius who conquered literature and academics in the same summer. The book was out. The book was the only thing that mattered. The first signing was at the Lucheng Hotel. 500 copies, a host with a microphone, and a line of fans stretching into the parking lot. Someone in the crowd shouted, "You old scoundrel, Muzi!" The whole room laughed. Then, the host asked what kind of book To Live was. I placed the microphone to my lips and said what I believed. In the Chinese language, the word living contains a profound power, not from loud shouts or fearless attacks, but from tenacious endurance. We bear the heavy responsibilities life bestows upon us and endure all that reality brings, happiness, suffering, and even those ordinary moments almost overlooked. She asked if the book glorified suffering. Suffering is never worthy of praise, I said. Suffering is simply suffering. What deserves praise is the unwavering will in the face of it. A girl came up holding 2 books, No Longer Human and To Live. Her voice cracked as she told me her mother had read No Longer Human and changed, stopped working 80-hour weeks, started coming home to be with her daughter during the darkest stretch of her life. The girl bowed and said her mother had sent her to say thank you. I signed both books and told her that if my work could become a bridge between a mother and her child, that was the greatest thing I could ask for as a writer. 500 copies in 3 hours. My hand went numb. Cao Jianlin told me I had 4 more signings to go. I completed all 5 in 10 days. By then, To Live had sold 750,000 copies. The readership was different this time. Middle-aged and older readers who had lived through the eras I wrote about, who recognized Fugi's suffering as their own. Not a single negative review in the first wave. Li Shuming called it one of the best novels in China since the beginning of the 21st century. Professor Zhu Fanghai of Peking University published an article titled Living is the Meaning of Life. Editor-in-Chief Hu told Tong Qing, The book deserved the title of great. On the 18th day, the Dubon rating settled at 9.7, 30,000 comments, 98% positive. On the 20th day, sales hit 2 million copies. CCTV's evening news covered the buying frenzy, 15 seconds of national broadcast. Then, President Liu requested my manuscript. President Wang called that morning, and I was overjoyed, not because of money, but because of what the request meant. When Mr. Sun arrived to collect the manuscript, I handed it over and told him I wanted nothing in return. He stared at me. I told him I was sure. 2 days later, he came back with a scroll. President Liu's own hand, in vigorous calligraphy. Doing good is like climbing a mountain. Doing evil is like a landslide. I hung it on my wall, poured a glass of aged Bai Fen liquor, sat with hot and sour potatoes and spicy chicken and a plate of peanuts. In my first life, I had dragged my crippled body through each day searching for 3 meals. Now, I was drinking good liquor with the president's calligraphy on my wall and 2 million copies in strangers' hands. I raised my glass to myself, a toast to the man who never gave up. The philosophy that Di Yang could not find, people live for the sake of living itself, had become the thesis of my magnum opus. It was not a statistic, it was an answer. To Di Yang, to Grandma He, to every centenarian who had told me their story beneath persimmon trees. This was why I wrote. Then the critics came. A writer named Li Song called To Live pure hype, a cockroach survival philosophy. His readers echoed him. Other voices joined. Historical nihilism, ideological garbage. I read every word. Then I looked at the calligraphy on my wall and smiled. Tongqing called, worried. I told her to let the bullets fly for a while longer. The internet did what the internet does. Netizens dug through Li Song's history, pro-foreign remarks, veiled criticisms, total book sales that had never cracked 1 million copies. They nicknamed him Li Millionaire. He deleted his post and shut down his comments. More critics piled on. Wang Shuang of Southern Daily, Fang Hui of the Hubei Writers Association. I still said nothing. Then the netizens noticed a pattern. Every critic had a history of public intellectual posturing. Someone connected it to my anti-public intellectual posts from 2011. The case was solved. They were not defending literature, they were settling a grudge. One by one, they disappeared. Wang Songjiang published Fugi in My Eyes, a defense that said Mu Zi neither criticized nor praised, but simply recounted a life lived in hardship. People's Daily listed To Live among the 100 most classic books since the founding of the Republic. 10 universities put it on their essential reading list. The Ministry of Education included it in the middle school reading guidance catalog. By summer's end, sales had reached 6.5 million copies. Then, Elder Wang, legendary novelist, honorary vice chairman of the Chinese Writers Association, people's artist, offered 500,000 yuan for my manuscript. I tried to give it to him for free. He responded through the press that he was old but not senile and would either pay or refuse. I accepted the money. Then, in front of every camera in the room, I donated it, plus 500,000 of my own, to Hope Primary Schools in Elder Wang's name. 1 million yuan total. I did not need the money. I needed those schools to have books. Tongqing asked me what was next. I walked to the window and said, I want to climb Mount Everest. My mother's voice hit a frequency I had not heard since the Mercedes purchase. You've made a little money and think you're someone special? Why don't you just fly to the moon? I explained about the Mountain Eagle Society at Peking University, founded in 1989. Serious climbers, years of training before any summit attempt. She stopped threatening to slap me, which I counted as progress. September came. I reported to Peking University on the 4th, moved into the 100 square meter house I had bought near campus. My advisor Zhang Shufeng handled registration. Director Zhu returned from a business trip, told me he had read all my books, praised To Live for showing him the resilience of the lower classes, and excused me from military training on one condition. I start the 3rd Sherlock Holmes novel. Even the department head was a Holmes fan. I went home and typed the title, The Hound of the Baskervilles. 5 days later, it was done. It was while moving boxes of books into my apartment that I met him. A man in his 40s, neat white shirt, standing in the hallway. He offered me a cigarette. I told him I was a freshman. His eyebrows shot up. He showed me his faculty ID, Professor Sun Heping, Department of Finance, Guanghua School of Management. My heart stopped for half a second. In my first life, Sun Heping had left Peking University in 2013 and become a star fund manager during the 2014-2015 bull market, one of the brightest names in Chinese finance. I had bought his fund at 3,100 points. He had made me money. Then, the post-pandemic crash took it all back. Now, here he was, 40 years old, lean and sharp, living one floor below me, offering me a cigarette and asking about Sherlock Holmes. He invited me for dinner, pig's ear salad and wulyangye. We talked capital markets. He said the index was around 2,100, not the right time. Real estate still had room. I pushed him. What about 2 years from now? He looked at me carefully. Perhaps. I knew he was right. The bull market was coming. I intended to ride it with him. I joined the Mountain Eagle Society the next day. President Su Jun told me about members who had died on the mountains. Zhou Huixia on Zhuebaoding in 1999. 5 climbers in an avalanche on Shishapangma in 2002. He said if I was doing this for fun, I should find another club. I told him about the pale blue dot photograph, Earth as a speck of light in the vastness of space, about how fame and fortune felt meaningless against that scale. Since I can't step onto the stage of the universe, I said, I'll be the protagonist of my own story. He extended his hand. Welcome to the Mountain Eagles. The training was brutal. Tuesday and Thursday conditioning, weekly rock climbing, weekend hikes. I held my own against teammates who had trained for years. 8 years of military discipline in my first life had given me a baseline most freshmen could not match. It was during one of those sessions that I met Sun Jiawen, 28 years old, PhD candidate in physics, the oldest active member. After a training run, she said something that silenced the group. Maybe in a few years, I won't even know where I'll be. The story came out over beer at a restaurant off campus. Her father had injured his back, 200,000 yuan in medical debt, borrowed from a neighbor. Her brother starting college. The neighbor's offer, marry their son, and the debt disappears. Her mother wanted her to come home. A Peking University PhD, 20 years of clawing out of the mountains, walking 20 kilometers to school every day, picking through garbage in high school to pay for food. First in her class, her town, her district. And now, one phone call threatened to drag her back. Zuo Peng and the others tried talking sense. Yanlin was fierce. Xiaoxia was gentle. Nothing worked. Then, Yanlin kicked me under the table. I called you here to help, and all you do is eat. Fair point. I looked at Sun Jiawen. If you go back and marry that man, what happens when your classmates' children are learning piano and attending summer camps abroad and you're struggling to afford tutoring? What happens when your child asks you for money you don't have? I laid it out. The education gap, the economic spiral, the generational trap. Not to be cruel, but because she already knew every word. She just needed someone to say it out loud. You studied for 20 years to change your destiny, I said. Are you really willing to throw that away? She could not look at me. You already have the answer in your heart. I'm just giving you a push. She went home days later, not to get married, to settle the debt. Pulled 50,000 from friends. Her advisor lent 150,000, and she walked into her parents' house with 300,000 yuan on the table. Her mother saw the money and did not say another word. She found me on the track field after her return, eyes glistening but smiling. Your words woke me up, she said. I might have made a choice I would regret for the rest of my life. I shook my head. You're a PhD in physics. You could see the cause and effect. You just needed someone to affirm what you already knew. Looking at her, I thought of Di Yang, another young person crushed by impossible family pressure. But Sun Jiawen had something Di Yang never got. Someone who said, you deserve better, and here is why. I could not save Di Yang, but I could push open a door for someone standing in front of it. That night, I wrote the opening line of The Moon and Sixpence. How long has it been since you truly lived for yourself? Director Jia called to say the No Longer Human film had finished post-production. Premiere, September 28th. I posted the promotion on Weibo. Jia Zhangke tagged me back. You'll be satisfied. The university settled into rhythm. Classes, training, writing, Sun Heping's financial conversations over dinner, Director Zhu's mentorship, the Mountain Eagles preparing their Everest proposal. I had To Live behind me, and The Hound of the Baskervilles in Tong Qing's hands, and The Moon and Sixpence taking shape on my desk. A president's calligraphy on my wall, a future fund manager one floor below, a mountaineering team that trained like they had something to prove. The Prodigy chapter was done. I was a Peking University student now, surrounded by people who were brilliant in ways that had nothing to do with book sales. And for the first time since my rebirth, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not at the summit yet, but climbing. The premiere of No Longer Human was on September 28th at the Shanghai Grand Theater. I spent the days before it doing interviews and roadshows, the kind of promotional work that made me want to claw my eyes out. Director Jia laughed every time I complained. One more day, he kept saying. One more day. The film was not what I expected. It was not the book. It was not Di Yang's story, translated frame by frame onto celluloid. Jia Zhangke had taken the bones of No Longer Human and rebuilt them into something else. A story about two strangers drowning in separate despair who find each other in the dark. The color palette was muted, suffocating. The soundtrack barely existed, and when the credits rolled, the audience at the Grand Theater sat in absolute silence for 6 seconds before the first pair of hands came together. I watched from the stage as the applause built. A fan in the third row shouted himself hoarse, trying to get my attention. I had someone pass him a microphone. He did not ask about the film. He asked when the 4th Sherlock Holmes book was coming. The audience laughed. I told them September 30th for The Hound of the Baskervilles. The 4th book? Give me until next June. Opening day, 14.35 million yuan. Dubon rating of 8.5. Looper made more money, but scored a 6.8. By the 3rd day, we had crossed 40 million. The theaters noticed. They bumped our screening share from 15% to 25%. Then came National Day. The holiday box office numbers came in on October 8th, and I stared at the figures until Cao Jianlin confirmed them twice. No Longer Human had taken the #1 spot for the entire National Day period. 170 million yuan in 10 days. An art film with no stars, no franchise, no Hollywood effects, beating every blockbuster in the biggest cinema week of the year. Tai Chi 1 did not even break 100 million. We beat it by 80 million yuan. On the same day the film started breaking records, The Hound of the Baskervilles launched worldwide. The 3rd Sherlock Holmes novel. I had written it in 5 days while director Zhu excused me from military training, and now the Times of London was calling it a great epoch-making work. The Sun declared that detective novels would forever be divided into 2 categories, Sherlock Holmes and everything else. 5.6 million copies in the first month, 8 million by November. Bestseller lists in 14 countries. Gothic atmosphere, 7 suspects. The investigation told through Watson's eyes for the first time. The readers who had followed Holmes from A Study in Scarlet said this was the best one yet. The readers who had never picked up a mystery novel before said they were afraid to walk alone at night. Then Tong Ching called. Fox is offering $22 million, she said, each word deliberate, for the television adaptation rights to The Sign of 4 and The Hound of the Baskervilles. I made her repeat it, 22 million. On top of the 8 million they had already paid for A Study in Scarlet. $30 million total, just in Sherlock Holmes television rights. The BBC had been sniffing around, offering £10 million for Hound alone, and Fox panicked. They wanted the whole franchise locked up. Agree to it, I said. The New York Times broke the story on October 3rd. By the time Chinese netizens woke up, the top 10 trending topics on Weibo all contained my name. Someone calculated my total earnings. 31.3 million copies sold across all books, 83 million yuan in royalties, plus $30 million in copyright fees, 200 million yuan at 19 years old. Newspapers around the world ran the story. People's Daily called me a symbol of Chinese youth on the global stage. British media invited me to visit. Prince William extended a personal invitation through the press. The numbers were staggering, but numbers alone do not justify a life. 3 days later, I held a press conference. Tong Ching arranged everything. CCTV cameras, the vice chairman of the Beijing Education Commission, the deputy director of the Shanghai Education Bureau, the vice president of Peking University, Principal Huang from my old high school. She introduced each of them, and the reporter's jaws dropped. I donated 5 million yuan to Peking University to establish the Muzi Scholarship for students in financial need. I donated a library to Lucheng No. 2 Middle School, the Z Building, named after a passage from Liu Shi's Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons. The way to establish literature lies in words and meaning, and I announced the Liwen Foundation, co-established with 3 education bureaus, to subsidize tuition and living expenses for impoverished students. 10 million yuan in the first year, 10% of my annual copyright revenue every year after. A CCTV reporter asked me why I was doing this now, because recent events have made me realize that a person's success is not only about achievements, I said. It is about what they contribute to those who have less. I was lucky. I wrote some books, and then I became famous. But luck without purpose is just noise. The foundation was not generosity. It was a debt I owed. In my first life, I had been the impoverished student. I had been the one who could not afford tutoring, who worked construction sites, who watched others climb while I dug foundations. This time, I could build the ladder. Then, on October 13th, Cao Jianlin called while I was finishing a run on the Peking University track. Liwen, your novel To Live has won the 2012 Franz Kafka Prize. I stopped breathing for 3 seconds. I knew To Live was good. I knew the Kafka Prize committee valued humanistic concern and cultural tolerance. I had told Tong Ching months ago that this was the award I was aiming for, but hearing the words, youngest recipient in the prize's 12-year history, first Chinese winner in a decade, the second Asian writer ever, my legs nearly gave out on the track. I called my mother first. She did not know what the Kafka Prize was. She kept saying, "My son won an award. My son won an award," until my father took the phone. He knew exactly what it was. He had looked up every major literary prize, domestic and international, since I became famous. "The Kafka Prize," he said quietly. "It is a bellwether for the Nobel Prize in Literature." That single sentence told me more about my father than anything he had said in 2 lifetimes. He had been studying, quietly, without telling anyone, learning the landscape of the world his son had entered. Director Zhu wrote a calligraphy couplet when he heard the news. The hidden dragon lies in the abyss, waiting for its time to fly. When it encounters wind and clouds, it transforms into a dragon. He hung it in his office. Wang Shuang of the Southern Daily, the same critic who had attacked To Live months earlier, slammed his phone against the wall when he heard. I celebrated with Sun Heping that night. Mutai this time, the good stuff. He raised his glass and said congratulations. I told him about the prize, the ceremony, the trip to Prague. He listened with the careful eyes of a man who evaluates everything. "So," he said, "you might win the Nobel Prize in Literature?" I shook my head. Too young. And the deadline for nominations has already passed. Maybe someday, but not today. He nodded. Then he told me he had found 2 doctoral students in finance, both graduating next year, both fans of my books. They wanted to work for me. My financial team was taking shape, quietly, methodically, the same way Sun Heping approached everything. On October 20th, I boarded a 15-hour flight to Prague. A flight attendant recognized me. She carried a copy of To Live in her bag, said she always got too sad to finish it, but could not stop trying. I signed it for her. Cao Jianlin watched from the next seat with an amused smile and closed his eyes. The city was everything the song said it would be. I declined the embassy's car and rode the trams through streets that had stood since the 11th century. I walked across the Charles Bridge, built in 1357, running my hand along stone that had been touched by 600 years of travelers. I stood before the astronomical clock from 1410 and watched the spectacle at the top of the hour. The 12 disciples of Jesus appearing in the windows, one by one, and Judas always last, grinning the most cunning grin. I sat in a cafe near St. Nicholas Cathedral, where Mozart once practiced piano, and ordered local coffee. The aroma mixed with distant church bells, and for the first time in months, my mind went quiet. No deadlines, no trending topics, no trolls, just a young man from Lucheng sitting in the heart of Europe, drinking coffee in a city that had survived empires. That night, I posted 9 photos on Weibo with 2 words, "Hello Prague." On October 22nd, the sun bathed Prague's old town in warm gold. At the Old Town City Hall, the Speaker of the Czech Senate and the Mayor of Prague awarded me a $10,000 prize and a bronze statue of Kafka, modeled after the memorial in the city. The Senate president shook my hand and said he could not believe the author of To Live was not yet 20 years old. "It is not that my novel is so well written," I told him. "It is that the period of our country's history is worth remembering." I thanked the committee, thanked Prague, and spoke about Kafka's influence on my own work, how The Metamorphosis had shown me that a character could walk through a door and already be in the square. That narrative did not need to obey the laws of physics, how that freedom had shaped every book I wrote. Time magazine ran a full-page tribute. The Washington Post called To Live an epic masterpiece with unconventional artistic charm. Spain's ABC said it had become a classic of contemporary Chinese literature. The Neue Zürcher Zeitung wrote that I continued to hold fast to my literary position, weaving moving chapters about the ups and downs of life. And back in China, the people who mattered most were watching. Guo Wei sat in the Tsinghua University cafeteria with his basketball teammates. Someone shouted, "It's Muzi," and pointed at the television. Guo Wei looked up and saw me accepting the prize in Prague. His teammate nudged him. "Weren't you 2 alumni?" Guo Wei said nothing. He picked up his beer and drank it in one gulp. "Congratulations, Wenzi. Yuan Yali, my Chinese teacher, the woman who first recognized my writing, who reported the bully plot that saved me, who brought my stories to Director Zhang when I was nobody, turned off the television in her apartment in Lucheng. She looked at the photograph of us on her desk. She smiled. Well done, Liwen. Director Zhang poured a drink for his wife and pointed at the screen. See for yourself, he said, grinning. I never imagined that kid would reach this level. His wife went out to buy cooked food. They celebrated properly. The prodigy they had nurtured in a small-town classroom was standing in a European capital, holding a statue of Kafka. It was not my victory alone. It was theirs. I returned to Peking University on October 25th. Director Zhu organized a symposium. Leaders from the National Writers Association, officials from Beijing, the university president and vice president. I spoke about Kafka's influence on my writing, about how The Metamorphosis taught me that narrative did not need to follow logic, about how reading was the noblest act with the lowest barrier to entry in the world. Students lined up for autographs for 90 minutes after the speech. A girl from the art department asked if I had a girlfriend. Director Zhu intervened before the crowd rioted. Around the same time, Jia Yudting called, Li TV. He wanted the film rights to Live for Zhang Yimou, who had split from his old partner. I agreed on one condition. The contract had to specify that only Zhang Yimou could direct. No substitutions. If the National Master was going to adapt my book, I wanted his name etched into the agreement. Then I finished The Moon and Sixpence. I had been writing it since September, inspired by Sun Jiawen's Crisis, the collision between ideals and reality, between what you owe the world and what you owe yourself. The protagonist was a man who abandoned his wife and children to pursue painting, not a hero, not a villain, a question mark. Tongqing and the editors at Mengya read the manuscript and held an emergency meeting. President Wang said what everyone was thinking. The book is a good book, but it will cause a storm. They were right. The Moon and Sixpence, released on January 1st, 2013, and the internet caught fire within hours. Female readers called the protagonist a monster. Professors called the book misogynistic. A Washington University academic wrote that the protagonist's unrestrained pursuit revealed not artistic dedication, but selfishness disguised as genius. Wang Shuang, still nursing his grudge, published an essay in the Southern Daily calling the entire novel trash. I sat in Director Zhu's office, drinking tea, watching the storm from above. You seem calm, he said. Let the bullets fly for a while longer, I told him. I want to see who else is hiding in the shadows. Because the literary criticism was not what worried me. Literary debate is healthy. What followed was not. On January 5th, an article went viral, unveiling the true face of writer Muzi. It claimed I had been a delinquent in high school, that I had juggled multiple girlfriends, that I had used my fame to get a classmate expelled. Paparazzi photos accompanied the piece. Carefully cropped images from my dinner with the Mountain Eagle Society, showing only me with Yan Lin and Sun Jiawen. Then, a separate photo of me having barbecue with Wu Xiaoli, a high school classmate I had bumped into at a karaoke bar. 3 women, 1 night. The implication was clear. The hashtags multiplied like bacteria. Li Liwen scumbag. Li Liwen juggling multiple relationships. Li Liwen in love. Commenters who had never read a single page of my work suddenly became moral authorities. No wonder he wrote that garbage protagonist in The Moon and Sixpence. Turns out the author himself is a cheater. My mother called, voice trembling. My father was in the background, silent. Mom, I really have not been dating, I said. The girl you brought home last time, she was just my class monitor. We were never together. No, not her either. Mom, please stop worrying about this. After hanging up, I rubbed my temples. They had dragged my parents into this. My mother, who scrolled through comment sections to collect compliments about her son, was now reading strangers calling me a womanizer. That was the line. The smear campaign had been orchestrated. Director Zhu saw it immediately. You have become famous too fast, he said. You have blocked the way for too many people. If they can take you down during this opportunity, they think they can regain their lost influence. I released the original unedited photos on Weibo, group shots showing Zuo Peng and all the others who had been cropped out. The police and the school verified the high school expulsion claim was baseless. The publisher issued a formal statement condemning the fabricated reports. But I was not done. Elder Wang, the 90-year-old honorary vice chairman of the Chinese Writers Association, the man who had bought my manuscript of To Live, published a defense of The Moon and Sixpence in the Guangming Daily. He titled it, Defending the Purity and Sublimity of Literature. His son told me later that the old man had stayed up writing it because, in his words, I cannot allow the future hope of Chinese literature to be tainted by those scoundrels, while these old bones can still breathe. The Douban rating climbed from 7.1 to 8.5 as more readers finished the book and understood what it actually said. The controversy was not about women. It was about a question nobody wanted to answer. If following your dream requires destroying everything else, is the dream still worth it? I had no intention of letting the slanderers walk away. I called Gu Wenping into my office. "Prepare the materials," I said. "We are going to see Professor Kui at the law school." Peking University's law school took the case. The scope was unprecedented. 23 media entities and 247 individuals who had published fabricated personal attacks, doctored photos, or deliberately incited harassment. I was not suing over book reviews. I was suing over lies about my character, my family, and my relationships. Lies manufactured to destroy a person, not to debate a novel. Cao Jianlin asked me if I had planned this from the beginning. "From the very beginning," I said. "I wanted to dig out every person behind this. Even if I cannot make all of them pay, I need to know who they are." The lawsuits were filed. The case would later be known as Incident 4396. 270 defendants. The snow outside Director Zhu's window was beginning to melt. I looked at it and thought about what Elder Wang had written, defending the purity of literature while his 90-year-old hands still worked. About Yuan Yali smiling at a photograph in Lucheng. About my father quietly studying literary prizes he had never heard of because his son lived in that world now. I was a Kafka Prize winner. My film was #1 at the box office. Sherlock Holmes had earned $30 million in television rights alone. I had launched a charitable foundation, published a controversial novel that asked the hardest question I knew how to ask, and filed lawsuits against 270 people who tried to bury me under lies. The world stage came with world-sized problems, but I had never been the kind of man who backed down from a fight. The court ruled on February 2nd. I stood at the entrance of the Beiping Municipal People's Court at 8 in the morning, Cao Jianlin beside me, cameras everywhere. Reporters shouted questions before I even reached the steps. I gave a short statement. I was not doing this for money. I was doing this so that the next person who got buried under fabricated lies would have a precedent to point to, so that cyberbullying would have a price tag. The hearing lasted several hours. The evidence was not complicated. It was overwhelming. 4,396 pages of documented slander, doctored photos, fabricated stories. The defense attorneys for the 23 media entities shuffled papers and avoided eye contact. The 247 individuals who had amplified the lies sat in clusters, some defiant, most pale. The judge read the verdict. All defendants were ordered to publish formal apology letters on the platforms where the defamation occurred, and to compensate me for reputational damages totaling 50,000 yuan. The money was symbolic. The apologies were the point. Afterward, I stood at the courthouse entrance with my back to the emblem. The cameras were still rolling. I said the only thing that mattered, people always have to pay the price for what they do and what they gain. 3 days later, the State Internet Information Office announced a 2-month nationwide Qinglang campaign. 7 categories of illegal online activity targeted: historical nihilism, troll farms, traffic fraud, black PR, underage protection violations, account manipulation. They cleaned up more than 12 million pieces of illegal content and shut down over 140 websites. 80 million accounts dealt with. My lawsuit had not caused that campaign, but it had been the match that lit the fuse. The government had been looking for a reason to act on internet toxicity, and a national cultural figure being buried under fabricated rumors gave them one. Sometimes the biggest changes start with one person refusing to stay quiet. The Dubon rating for The Moon and Sixpence had already climbed back to 8.5. Global sales crossed 5 million copies. Female readers were writing essays titled, "Sisters, We All Misunderstood Liwen." CCTV's Asa Baining discussed the book on air, asking the question the novel had always been about: how should one live one's life? Justice had been served, the liars had been named, and the book they tried to kill was thriving. For Lunar New Year, my parents came to Beijing. I could not go back to Lucheng. The lawsuit follow-up consumed everything, so they flew north. My mother arrived with 2 suitcases, one full of clothes I did not need and one full of snacks I did not ask for. On New Year's Eve, firecrackers flooded through the windows of my apartment. I lay on the sofa sending greetings on WeChat, while my mother reorganized my kitchen for the 3rd time. My father sat in the armchair, reading the newspaper like he always did. At the airport on Valentine's Day, when they left, my mother held my hand and gave me the speech. "We have money now, but you must never spend it on crooked things. You must never go astray. Mom, I am very busy at school every day. I do not have time to go astray." My father glanced at his watch. "Our son is grown up. He can take care of himself." He pulled my mother toward the boarding gate. Practical, efficient, the Li Jiangguo way. I hugged them both and watched them disappear through security. Then I called Cao Jianlin. "Old Cao, I have finished writing my new book. Come and get it." On February 28th, Forbes released the 2013 world's highest paid authors list. Liwen, $34 million in total income. ranked 4th globally. I also took first place on the Asia 30 Under 30 list. The same week, the UK released its 2012 bestseller rankings. The Sign of Four, 2nd. The Hound of the Baskervilles, 5th. I was the only author under 30 and the only non-British author on the UK's most influential writers list. I sat in my apartment reading the Forbes article on my phone, and the number felt abstract. $34 million. My father had earned less in his entire career than I earned in a single month. My mother still brought me homemade snacks in suitcases. The distance between those two realities was the distance between my two lives, and I was determined never to forget which side I came from. Around the same time, I told my team I was starting a publishing company. Over hot pot at Yuan, I laid it out for them. Chao Jianlin, Wang Jifei, Sun Jifei, Gu Wenping, Sun Xiangling. 30% salary increases across the board. Lao Chao had already agreed. The rest exchanged glances. Then, Wang Jifei shrugged. It is just a change in organizational affiliation. I agree. One by one, they all followed. These 5 people had stood with me through lawsuits, smear campaigns, international negotiations, and midnight manuscript deadlines. They deserved more than a salary increase. They deserved to build something of their own. The Little Prince launched on March 20th. I had written it as a gift to myself for turning 20, an adult fairy tale dressed in children's clothing. Every bookstore in the country displayed the same slogan, give it to the children and also to yourself. The early sales were slow. Critics laughed. The man who wrote To Live and No Longer Human was writing fairy tales now? Some compared it to Jay Cho, suddenly performing Erenzhuan, different instruments entirely. But then a woman named Hao Yuqing bought a copy for her 8-year-old daughter in a Xinhua bookstore. She read it that afternoon while cleaning the house. She saw the line, "One day, I watched the sunset 44 times." And she felt something she could not name. Loneliness, described in the language of a child, hitting her harder than any literary novel ever had. Her husband came home and found her crying on the sofa. He thought someone had hurt her. She handed him the book. He read the same line about 44 sunsets. Then he read, "The biggest problem is not growing up, but forgetting. And only by looking with your heart can you see clearly. What is truly important cannot be seen with your eyes." His eyes turned red too. That night, they realized they had forgotten to pick up their daughter from her grandparents. It was already 9 o'clock. They raced out, calmed their furious child, and brought her home. Hao Yuqing read The Little Prince aloud until the girl fell asleep. Then she kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "There may be 5,000 flowers in the world, just like you, but you are my one and only rose." Schools began recommending it for all students. Wang Rui's bookstore in Shanghai, the little shop on Dingwen Road that had been the first to sell my books, ran out of copies within days. Her uncle, Wang Songzhang at Mengya, told her the booksellers were blocking the publishing house doors with trucks full of cash, just like they had with No Longer Human. Then, Professor He Jun at Hong Kong University published an essay that changed everything. This should not just be a children's fairy tale. He argued that the inhabitants of the 6 planets symbolized the emptiness of the adult world, that the rose was love, that the baobab tree was unchecked desire, that the fox was wisdom. The essay went viral. Everyone started asking themselves when exactly they had become an adult. Director Zhu held a tea party at Peking University. The secretary came. A dozen professors came. They shared their favorite lines. Director Zhu connected my works, No Longer Human, To Live, The Moon and Sixpence, The Little Prince, and traced a single thread through all of them, the meaning of life. He placed me in the tradition of existentialism, not because I had planned it that way, but because every book I wrote kept circling the same question, and the question kept getting larger. On May 20th, The Little Prince crossed 10 million copies sold in 2 months, the fastest selling book in Chinese publishing history. People's Daily, Guangming Daily, Shanghai Daily, every major paper ran the story. Le Monde called it the 21st century Anderson. The New York Times said this single book was enough to place me among the greatest writers of our time. El País wrote that it struck a chord that reached the most hidden corners of the soul, 10 million copies, in 60 days. For a fairy tale about a boy and a rose and a fox. I sat in my apartment reading the foreign reviews, and I thought about Di Yang, about the boy who had said, "I am sorry for being born." I had written No Longer Human to scream his pain into the world. I had written The Little Prince to whisper the answer, that love is invisible, that you must feel it with your heart, that the stars twinkle at night because somewhere, someone is thinking of you. On June 3rd, Prince Charlie extended his invitation again through the media. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs called. The Ministry of Culture called. Both suggested I accept. I shrugged and told my team to finalize the itinerary. 10 days in the UK, starting June 15th. Private capacity, cultural exchange. The British went mad. Bookstores hung banners in Chinese. Welcome Mr. Liwen. Fans started learning Mandarin greetings. 9 registered Sherlock Holmes fan clubs, 80,000 members total in a country of 60 million, issued joint statements welcoming my arrival. A construction worker's son from Lucheng, flying on a Ministry of Foreign Affairs jet to meet the Crown Prince of England. My father would have laughed if he were not so busy pretending he was not impressed. Prince Charlie met me at the Hotel Café Royal that evening. He shook my hand warmly and told me he had read every published Sherlock Holmes novel. His favorite was The Hound of the Baskervilles. He said the environmental descriptions nearly convinced him I was a native Englishman. That is because my favorite country in all of Europe is yours, I told him. He smiled. Although we all think so, we should try not to say it that way. Some people will be unhappy. He introduced me to the Sherlock Holmes Society, Earl Sean, Earl Ian, Viscount James, and Miss Jennifer. The society was composed entirely of royalty and nobility. Prince Charlie himself was a member. Jennifer nearly vibrated out of her seat when she saw me. Her brother Viscount James said she had wanted to fly to China since last year. The prince asked the question every fan asks, "When will we see the next Sherlock Holmes?" "As soon as possible, Your Highness," I said with a wry smile. He had hired a Chinese chef for the dinner, chopsticks on the table, sweet and sour pork ribs. The Crown Prince of England eating Chinese food with a Chinese author who had sold 9 million books in his country. I looked around the table, earls and viscounts, debating whether the sign of 4 or the hound was superior, and thought about my father pouring concrete in Shandong summers. The contrast was so absurd, it almost made me laugh. Over the following days, Prince Charlie accompanied me to London's famous sites. Everywhere we went, Sherlock Holmes fans mobbed me for photos and autographs. The prince became a background figure. An elderly woman approached, embraced me, praised Mr. Holmes as a true gentleman, then asked Viscount James, the son of an earl, to take their photograph. Jennifer burst out laughing. The prince joked that it was the first time in his life the public's attention was not on him. Then, the tabloid reporters closed in. 3 days of interviews turned into 3 television stations and 7 newspapers. Reporters camped outside my hotel. One disguised himself as a hotel cleaner and tried to sneak in. The butler caught him and handed him to the authorities. I fell ill from exhaustion. Slight fever, nothing serious. But the British government panicked and cleared the press away. I did a book signing at a London university for Chinese international students, wearing a mask, voice barely working, 38 degrees Celsius. I apologized for not being able to chat. The students did not care. They lined up, said, "Go for it, Brother Wen," and waited patiently. Not one of them wasted a second of my time. I signed every book with the same care I always did. On the subway in London, my bag was stolen. An Indian pickpocket grabbed it while I was helping another passenger with directions. My passport, documents, everything. Prince Charlie was furious. He ordered the police to investigate immediately. The French president invited me to visit France on Twitter, promising the theft would never happen there. 3 days later, the police found the thief. He had panicked when he realized whose bag he had stolen and hidden it at home untouched. Everything recovered except the cash. I posted a thank you on Weibo. Chinese netizens roasted the UK mercilessly. German netizens suggested renaming London the capital of thieves. Russian netizens called it the biggest joke of the century. The British internet collapsed, but I had come to the UK for more than interviews and stolen bags. I went to Chatsworth House, built in 1552, the ancestral home of the Dukes of Devonshire. 400,000 square meters of gardens, 140 square kilometers total. Queen Mary I had been imprisoned there. I walked the grounds and felt the weight of centuries in the stone. The sunlight hit the lawns in sheets of gold. I could see the hedgerows, the fountains, the library windows where generations of aristocrats had read by candlelight. This was Pemberley. This was Darcy's estate. I was writing Pride and Prejudice, a love story set in a world of country manners and social hierarchy, and I needed to feel the air inside those walls, to hear the silence that wealth buys, to understand the pride that comes from owning land your family has held for 5 centuries. I wrote both versions in 10 days, Chinese and English simultaneously. The system had given me both texts, but reconstruction was grueling work. Every sentence in the English version was meticulously crafted, full of rhetorical devices that made me understand the language in ways I never had before. By the time I put down my pen on July 9th, the night before finals, I had nothing left. Every drop of energy spent. Cao Janlin arrived to pick up the manuscripts and stared at both stacks. Did you think translation fees were too expensive, so you did it yourself? It is also an experiment, I said. You are just stingy, he said. Pride and Prejudice went on sale on July 20th, online and offline simultaneously. JD.com promised 5-hour delivery. At 9 o'clock, readers flooded the purchase page. The Chinese version, 500,000 copies, sold out in 10 seconds. Netizens scrambled to the English version, 50,000 copies, gone in another minute. Total time, 64 seconds, 850,000 copies. Cao Janlin touched his thinning hair and winced. Tong Qing sat in the Shanghai office, counting the numbers over and over. 2 million copies a week in China? She whispered. Am I insane or is the world insane? Editor-in-chief Hu snatched the report, read it, and shot to his feet. 2 million copies in a week. How is that possible? First week worldwide, 3.1 million copies. 2 million domestic, 1.1 million overseas. The Sherlock Holmes fans who had spent a week threatening to storm Peking University and arrest me fell silent, then admitted, grudgingly, that the book was not bad. Jia Huihui, a detective fiction devotee who had publicly sworn never to read my non-Holmes work, finished Pride and Prejudice in one sitting and realized she had just enjoyed a domineering CEO romance novel. She was furious with herself. Then, Professor Su from Peking University's English department uploaded a 3.5-hour video to Bilibili, analyzing the English version sentence by sentence. He dissected the opening line alone for 20 minutes. The irony in universally acknowledged, the choice of in possession of over a simple verb, the symmetry with in want of. The video hit 4 million views and 1 million likes in a single day. English majors across China descended on it like a masterclass had been delivered from heaven. Peking University's English department listed Pride and Prejudice as required reading. Tsinghua followed. Fudan followed. The Ministry of Education considered including it in the national English curriculum. A Chinese literature student had written a book that became a textbook for English departments. The internet did not know whether to applaud or riot. On July 20th, the same day the book launched, my studio announced that total career sales across all titles had reached 100 million copies. 1 in every 75 people on Earth owned something I had written. 300 million yuan in direct revenue, not counting film rights, TV rights, or merchandise. Director Zhu sat at home drinking tea while his wife read the newspaper. She said, "Your student's new book sales are in the paper again." He waved his hand. "Do not call him my student. I cannot be his teacher." His wife rolled her eyes. "Before you say that, try to control your expression. Your chin is practically pointing at the sky." He was proud, and he was also worried. "The book sacrifices depth for entertainment," he told his wife. "It will give his enemies ammunition. He has been too popular for too long. He has blocked the way for too many people." I knew that. I had always known that, but I had not written Pride and Prejudice to prove my depth. I had written it to prove my range. To Live showed I could make people cry. Sherlock Holmes showed I could make them think. The Little Prince showed I could make them remember. And Pride and Prejudice showed I could make them fall in love. No genre was off limits. No style was beyond reach. The critics could debate whether the book had enough substance. The readers had already voted with 850,000 copies in 64 seconds. 100 million books, a Forbes top 4 ranking, a fairy tale that sold 10 million copies in 2 months, a romance novel that crashed JD.com's servers, a personal relationship with the Crown Prince of England, and a society of aristocratic Sherlock Holmes fans, and a lawsuit victory that sparked a national reckoning with online toxicity. The empire was at its peak, and I was only 20 years old. The empire was at its peak, and the empire had critics. A man named Wang Shuang, editor-in-chief of a provincial daily newspaper, total career book sales, under 3 million copies, posted a 400-word essay on Weibo declaring that my talent had run dry. Pride and Prejudice was proof, he said, that I had abandoned depth to chase the market, that any writer who stooped to popular fiction would never again produce work at the level of To Live. He was certain of this. Absolutely certain. It trended at number 10. Reporters ambushed me after a book signing in Guangzhou, shoving phones in my face. I pulled up his Weibo in front of them, scrolled through it, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This was the second time he had taken a public shot at me. The first time, I let it pass. The second time, no. I was 20 years old, and I had my own temper. Since Editor-in-Chief Wang values me so highly, I told the cameras, I have a question for him. When exactly will he write his own To Live so I can learn from it? Surely he can manage one in his lifetime. Surely. That night, Cao Jianlin told me I had been impulsive. I put down my chopsticks and looked him in the eye. He cursed at me publicly twice. I tolerated it once. Should I tolerate it forever? Be glad I am 20 now, Lao Cao, and not 17. At 17, I would have burned his entire Weibo to the ground. What if your next work does not turn out well? He asked. Then I will write a novel 10 times better than To Live. You have an idea? No. Lao Cao threw his chopsticks on the table and refused to eat. The idea came from a man named Lei Diansheng. The Mountain Eagle Society invited him to give a lecture at Peking University. A man who had walked 81,000 kilometers across China alone, crossed the Lop Desert in 31 days, sold his house before starting, and even had his appendix removed to prevent emergencies on the road. His own brother's neighbors had asked if he was mentally ill. He stood at the lectern and spoke for 2.5 hours. I listened to every word. In my past life, I had read his book, Belief, during a squad leader training camp in the Army, the darkest, most exhausting period of my military service. His story had kept me going then. Hearing him tell it in person hit differently now. After the lecture, I walked home through campus, and I saw a couple with a small child at the supermarket. The man wore a suit, clearly exhausted from work, but his eyes lit up every time he looked at his wife and daughter, and something clicked inside me. The greatest meaning of life might be to accept your own ordinariness. When I was young, in my first life, I had dreamed of greatness. I had been terrified of mediocrity. I fought against it, clawed against it, drank myself numb when I could not escape it. I stayed up until 1 in the morning watching videos and scrolling through novels, not because I enjoyed it, but because sleep meant mourning, and mourning meant returning to a life that had no meaning. But that man in the supermarket with the tired suit and the bright eyes, he had found his meaning. It was small, it was ordinary, and it was enough. I called Xiao Jianlin. Old Xiao, I know what to write. He arrived in an hour, sweating. I poured him tea he did not touch. I want to write about a fool, I said. An absurd, stubborn fool who lives his entire life inside a romantic dream. He never gives up, despite being mocked and beaten and left for dead. He charges at windmills because he believes they are giants. He fights for ideals the entire world calls impossible. He is a clown in everyone else's eyes, but he is his own knight. I paused. I call him Don Quixote. Cao Jianlin silently lit a cigarette, took a drag. What do you need me to do? 16th century Spain. I need everything you can find on the Renaissance. History, culture, colonialism, idealism, realism, books, as many as you can carry. He stood up. I will go prepare now. 26 books arrived the next day. I requested help from the history department through Director Zhu, who introduced me to Director Wang over dinner. Director Wang patted his chest and said he would handle anything I needed. I took sick leave from classes and disappeared into research. The character biographies alone took 24 days, over 700 characters, 120,000 words of backstory for people who did not exist yet. Then came the outline, 240,000 words of plot structure for a novel I estimated would reach 650,000 words total. Director Zhu read the outline at his home over Lunar New Year. I had visited him with 2 bottles of Mao Tai and a stack of manuscript pages. While he read, I went into his kitchen and made dumplings with his wife, Teacher Wang. When dinner was ready, I cooked several dishes myself. Director Zhu emerged from his study 2 hours later, cigarette smoke trailing behind him. Your novel is very bold, he said. Be careful with the colonialist themes. If you are not precise, people will accuse you of glorifying colonialism instead of critiquing it. I know, I said. That is why I need you to check it when I am done. He nodded. Bring it over. I will call old Wang from history too. We cannot let those drinks go to waste. After the new year, I returned to Beijing and sealed myself inside my apartment. Phone off. Meals delivered by Wang Jifei. Writing from 8 in the morning until midnight. 300,000 words by mid-March. But before the manuscript consumed me entirely, I had flown to London one more time. And this time, the trip almost became an international incident. It started with a joint letter. Sherlock Holmes fans in the UK had written to the Queen requesting that my fictional detective be awarded a knighthood. Prince Charlie, I learned later, had been the one who organized the entire campaign and ensured the letter reached royal hands. A council meeting was convened. They declined the medal for me personally. I was a foreign citizen, but approved something unprecedented, a knighthood for Sherlock Holmes, the character. The first time in history a fictional character had been knighted. Chinese netizens lost their minds. So do we call him Lord Li or Lord Holmes? Someone asked. Neither, another replied. He is now the father of a lord. A government meeting was convened in Beijing. Ministers from foreign affairs, culture, and public security attended. The consensus was clear: accept the honor. China was strong enough to let one of its citizens receive a foreign recognition without anyone questioning his loyalty. Minister Wang himself said, as long as Comrade Li Liwen cares about the motherland, this is not a big deal. I propose donating 2 manuscripts in return: The Hound of the Baskervilles to the royal family, and Pride and Prejudice to Prince Charlie personally. The leaders nodded. Leader Hua announced it at the regular press conference. The manuscript handover made the evening news. I appeared on CCTV for the second time in my career. On December 15th, I arrived at Buckingham Palace. The ceremony hall gleamed, chandeliers, gold trim. Reporters from every major network on Earth packed the press gallery. I walked to the center of the venue, and a palace attendant began guiding me through the ceremonial positions. That was when Earl Weems approached to review the final procedures, and that was when I learned I was supposed to kneel. Earl, I said, keeping my voice level, why did nobody tell me there was a kneeling requirement? Weems looked genuinely surprised. No one informed you? This is absurd. It must be an oversight by the staff. The procedures are quite simple, Mr. Li Liwen. I assure you, you will master them within minutes. You misunderstand me. If I had known I was expected to kneel before the Queen, I would never have come. Silence. I am a Chinese citizen, I said. Please understand that. His expression hardened. Then what do you want? The ceremony begins in minutes. Cancel the kneeling portion. Impossible. This tradition has endured for centuries. It cannot be changed. Then I refuse to participate. The words hung in the air like a blade. 20 minutes. That was how long we stood there. The ceremony stalled, the cameras rolling, the entire world watching 2 men locked in a standoff neither could afford to lose. Earl Weems told me my refusal was contempt for the royal family. I told him his surprise kneeling requirement was an insult to a Chinese citizen with 300 million fans. He left, came back. His face had changed. Mr. Li Liwen, we have reached a compromise. The manuscript of The Hound of the Baskervilles will serve as the principal recipient. The Queen will conduct the ceremony upon the manuscript. You will accept the medal and certificate on its behalf. No kneeling required. I studied his expression for anything hidden. There will not be any more surprises? You have my word. Then let us proceed. Queen Elizabeth entered with the royal family. The cameras focused, and in front of every major news network on Earth, the Queen of England placed her sword upon a book and spoke the knighting words to a manuscript. Chinese netizens were howling. The Queen is muttering spells at a book. Li Liwen looks like he's about to lose it. This is the most surreal ceremony in human history. Reporters swarmed me afterward. The CCTV journalist, the sharp one, asked about my conversation with Weems. I smiled and said my English was not very good, and there had been a small communication error regarding the procedures. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they would detach from her skull. The man who had single-handedly translated Pride and Prejudice into best-selling English, claiming his English was not good enough. Nobody believed it. Nobody needed to. The point was not the explanation. The point was the 20 minutes everyone had witnessed, and the fact that I had walked out of Buckingham Palace standing. Within hours, a Bilibili creator uploaded a 2-hour analysis video, a thrilling 20-minute standoff, how Li Liwen dealt with the UK's sinister intentions. 3 million views. He dissected the ceremony frame by frame, identified the moment I stopped moving, the moment Weems left and returned, and concluded that the UK had deliberately omitted the kneeling requirement to trap me. His theory was elaborate, dramatic, and almost certainly exaggerated, but the core was right. Nobody on their staff had forgotten to mention the kneeling to the single most famous author on Earth. The omission had been a choice, and my refusal had been the only possible answer. Online, the debate exploded exactly as I knew it would. Half the internet screamed that I had defended national dignity. The other half said it was just a ceremony. Why make it political? The comments tore each other apart. Neither side would budge. Neither side was entirely wrong, but I knew what I had done, and I knew why. In my first life, I had knelt plenty. To bosses who did not deserve my respect, to circumstances that ground me into dust, to a world that told me I was ordinary and expected me to accept it quietly. I had spent 31 years on my knees in one way or another. I was not doing it again. Not for anyone. Not for any crown. I returned to China quietly. On the tarmac, my phone buzzed with a message from the ministry. The leader's voice was warm. The leadership paid close attention to your trip. You did well. By the way, have you considered joining the party? My heart stirred. I have wanted to for a long time. Then submit your application. I did. At home, Sun Jifei handed me a copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles and asked me to sign it. Signed copies were selling for 50,000 yuan online. I am keeping it as a memento, he said. Sure he was. The signed book market had gone insane. My autographed copies were collector's items now. The manuscript Old Wang had offered 500,000 yuan for was reportedly worth 3 million. Some things had stopped being measurable in money. I went back to Don Quixote, back to the apartment, back to writing from 8 to midnight. 300,000 words done by mid-March, and the characters were starting to breathe on their own. The mad knight and his loyal squire, the windmills and the innkeepers, the women who laughed at him and the readers who would love him. Then, Cao Jianlin arrived with news that stopped me cold. Your novel To Live has been nominated for the Maodun Literature Prize. The shortlist will be announced around the end of May. My hand froze over the manuscript page. The Maodun Literature Prize, China's highest literary honor, the award I had thought about in private and never spoken about aloud. The Kafka Prize had been international validation. This was home. Nervous? Cao Jianlin asked, grinning. Nonsense. Would you not be? You have seen bigger stages. You brought home the Kafka Prize. That is the Maodun Prize, Lao Tao. The Kafka Prize proved I could write. The Maodun Prize would prove my own country believes it. He softened. I asked around. Your chances are high this year. Stop. Do not open the champagne at halftime. I do not want to be AC Milan on Istanbul night. His face went dark. You son of a… What? I am an AC Milan fan. I poured him tea and changed the subject. That evening, I invited Lao Chao and Sun Heping for drinks. Lao Sun had been through hell. His divorce was final. His ex-wife had moved on. His parents would not stop pressuring him about remarrying. Halfway through the second bottle of Mao Tai, he started crying. Does your offer still stand? He asked. About me coming to work with you? Of course it does. He wiped his face with both hands. Then I will resign tomorrow. He raised his glass. From now on, I follow you, great writer. We drank. Cao Jianlin said what we were all thinking. A 53-year-old and a 30-year-old, both working for a 20-year-old. Where is the justice in this world? 5 days later, we registered Yike Company Limited, 50 million yuan in capital, 3 departments, the Li Liwen Foundation, the Li Liwen Studio, and an investment department run by Sun Heping, the man I had known in my past life as a future legend of Chinese finance. I went back to classes at Peking University. Between writing sessions, I attended every lecture, sat in the back row, took notes like any other student. The professors had stopped being surprised. The other students had stopped staring. I was just Li Liwen, the kid who always looked tired and smelled faintly of cigarettes and ink. Global sales crossed 150 million copies, 7 world records broken. Pride and Prejudice alone had sold 9 million worldwide. The Little Prince merchandise, dolls, keychains, clothing had generated $10 million in licensing revenue. And somewhere in my apartment, 300,000 words of Don Quixote sat on my desk, waiting to become 650,000. Somewhere in an office at the Chinese Writers Association, a nomination form with my name on it moved through channels. And somewhere inside my chest, a knot of anxiety tightened every time I thought about the Maodun Prize. I had refused to kneel before a queen. I had stood my ground against an empire. But this was my own people, deciding whether I belonged among their greatest. That was the one verdict I could not control. Zhang Yimou's To Live premiered at Cannes on June 20th, 2014. I was not there. I was in Brazil. The World Cup had pulled me across the ocean, and on the night the film screened for the first time, I was sitting in a stadium watching Uruguay dismantle England 2-1. Suarez, the madman, had just come back from meniscus surgery and still buried both chances like they were penalties. I was on my feet, screaming with 60,000 strangers, when my phone started buzzing. Cao Jianlin's voice was barely audible over the roar. Liwen, can you hear me? To Live won. It won the Palme d'Or. What? I pressed the phone harder to my ear. I can't hear you. What happened? I said To Live won at Cannes. Palme d'Or, best film. Zhang Yimou won best director. The crowd erupted again. The Netherlands had just scored against Mexico in the 88th minute. Snyder. I looked up at the screen, then back at my phone, and the absurdity of the moment hit me. The biggest award of my literary career, and I was learning about it while a Dutch midfielder celebrated a World Cup goal on the other side of the pitch. Old Chow, are you there? The line was dead. The stadium was deafening. Huntelaar scored the winner 6 minutes later. Netherlands 2, Mexico won. I stood there in the noise, holding a silent phone, and I laughed. Back in China, the news was already everywhere. People's Entertainment ran the headline. Film Weekly, Chinese Film News, every outlet had the same story. After 21 years, China had a second Palme d'Or. The first had been Farewell My Concubine in '93. Now it was To Live. Zhang Yimou had poured everything into that film. He had told me during the test screening that he had not felt this kind of creative fire since directing the 2008 Olympic opening ceremony. And he had delivered. 146 minutes of quiet devastation, shadow puppets as metaphor, Fugi putting chicks into the dusty box while the sunlight streamed through the gaps. The audience at Cannes had sat in silence for a long time before the applause began. When I finally called Cao Jianlin back, days later, from a different country, he answered with, "Oh, now you call. I saw the reports. Zhang Yimou is incredible. And your reaction? The film adapted from your novel just won the Palme d'Or. I am not a director, Lao Cao. I am not an actor. I did not invest. The box office has nothing to do with me." I paused. But yes, it feels good. He sighed the particular sigh of a man who had given up trying to make me act normal. Then he told me Don Quixote was scheduled for release on August 1st, Army Day, 2 volumes, 600,000 words, 50 yuan per set. I had finished the final draft on June 10th, after more than 300 days of continuous work. When I put down the pen, I felt lighter than I had in months. I walked to the mirror and barely recognized myself, 64.5 kilograms. I had lost nearly 10 pounds writing a single novel. My cheeks were hollow. My eyes were bright, but sunken. The system had given me a body that could push beyond normal limits, but Don Quixote had tested even those. The book went to Director Zhu and Director Wang from History first, 20 advance copies, sent to literary elders and leaders who had earned the right to read it before the world. Director Zhu called me after finishing. "This book deserves the title of great," he said. Director Wang agreed. "No historical inaccuracies, no missteps on colonialism. The balance is just right," he said. Then he looked at Director Zhu with the expression every colleague of mine seemed to develop sooner or later, half admiration, half bitter humor. "You lucky bastard, old Zhu. About to retire and you found this treasure." Director Zhu just laughed. On August 1st, Don Quixote hit shelves across the country. Bookstore customers picked it up and nearly dropped it. 2 volumes, thick as bricks, heavier than anything I had ever published. The staff at Qingdao Xinhua told customers it was 50 yuan per set and not sold individually. Some people hesitated. Then they opened the first page and stopped hesitating. Within days, the responses began pouring in. A man named Wang Hongguo wrote online that after finishing the book, he saw a child in his mind, a boy draped in a bedsheet, holding a wooden sword his grandfather had carved, charging at a goose in the yard. The boy who dreamed of slaying dragons. The boy who grew up, lowered his head, and became ordinary. And then he looked at the mad old knight on the thin horse, staring down at him from the page, and he wept. A doctoral student at Fudan posted a viral analysis on Jihu. He called the novel a mirror of the human condition. 700 characters, each one a thread in a tapestry about what happens when ideals collide with reality. He compared Don Quixote to Kong Yiji, to Ah Q, to every dreamer who lived at the intersection of a dying civilization and a rising one. Everyone can find their own reflection in this book, he wrote. The post was shared hundreds of thousands of times. By August 14th, global sales crossed 1.5 million, 700,000 in China, 800,000 overseas. The numbers were lower than The Little Prince or Pride and Prejudice. This was not a book that went down easy. It was dense, philosophical, demanding, but the literary community understood what it was. President Wang at Mengya said it plainly. At 21, he wrote a Nobel Prize-worthy work. Spain embraced it as if I were one of their own. Many Spanish readers said that if the author's name had not been printed on the cover, they would have sworn the book was written by a Spaniard. The Renaissance research, every custom, every anecdote, every shade of historical texture had landed, and I knew what they did not. I knew that the knight in the book was me. Don Quixote was a fool who charged at windmills because he believed they were giants. He fought for ideals the entire world called impossible. He was beaten, mocked, left for dead, and he got back on his horse every single time. In the end, the world cured him of his madness, and the cure killed him. Because without the dream, there was nothing left. I had written the book for everyone who had ever been that boy with the wooden sword. For Cao Jianlin, who read the manuscript and said quietly, "I saw myself." for every reader who recognized the moment when they stopped charging and started bending. But underneath all of that, Don Quixote was my confession, my mirror, the story of a man who was given a second chance and chose to spend it tilting at every windmill the world put in his path. Wang Yambo, old Wang's son, came to my apartment and bought the revised manuscript for 9 million yuan. His father had insisted. The value of this manuscript cannot be measured in money, old Wang had told him. I agreed, but 9 million was 9 million. Then came the verdict I had been dreading, the Mao Dun Literature Prize, China's highest literary honor. 247 works entered the initial selection. To Live made the preliminary list in June. Cao Jianlin called me with the news, and we drank the 99 Mao Tai I had been saving. It was a good night, but the rounds that followed were agony. 6 rounds of voting, 62 judges. In the first round, To Live ranked third. In the second, it slipped to 6th. In the third, 7th, outside the top 5, the cutoff for winners. It is your age, Cao Jianlin told me. They think you are too young. I wanted to scream. The Kafka Prize had not cared about my age. Cannes had not cared about my age. 150 million readers across the planet had not cared about my age. But in my own country, the judges looked at a 21-year-old and hesitated. Director Zhu was fighting for me behind the scenes. Old Wang, who had his own work nominated, was lobbying on my behalf, risking accusations of impropriety. Shencheng Translation and Mengya were doing everything they could, and I sat at home and waited, because this was the one verdict I could not control. On October 2nd, the 6th and final round convened. Vice Minister Guan from Foreign Affairs attended. The president of the Chinese Writers Association attended. Before the voting began, Guan stood at the podium and spoke about what 150 million copies meant for Chinese literature going global. He spoke about setting benchmarks, about courage. To Live passed with 53 votes. Cao Jianlin called me during lunch. I was eating leftovers. Liwen, you won. My chopsticks stopped moving. I won? The Mao Dun Literature Prize. You are the youngest winner in the history of the award. I sat there for a long time, staring at the bowl in front of me. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and stir-fried garlic shoots with pork. It was all I had in the fridge. I ate it standing at the counter, and it tasted exactly the same as it always did. The Kafka Prize had been the world telling me I could write. The Mao Dun Prize was my own country saying, you are the best we have. In my first life, I had been a 31-year-old choking on cheap cigarettes in a parking lot, asking what my life would have been if I had just kept studying. Now, I was 21, and the answer was sitting in my hands. A certificate, a recognition, a circle closing so perfectly it almost hurt. CCTV invited me for my second face-to-face interview. Reporter Gu Bing smiled when she saw me. The last time I interviewed you was 3 years ago, she said. You were a kid next door. Now you have won the Mao Dun Prize. She asked if I wrote for awards. I told her the truth. At first, I wrote for money. Then I achieved financial freedom, and I stopped writing for money. Now I write because I want to, because I enjoy it. She asked about Don Quixote, the weight I had lost, the 10 pounds that vanished into 600,000 words. She asked about Sherlock Holmes fans demanding the 4th book. She asked if 9 novels in 4 years was my creative peak. Probably not, I said. I feel like my writing has only just begun. In February, I finished the 4th Sherlock Holmes novel, 4 months of work, and the fans could finally stop threatening to ambush me at Peking University. Dubon released the year's bestseller list shortly after, and I stared at it for a long time. 7 of the top 20 were mine. The Little Prince at number 1, To Live at number 2, Don Quixote at 9, the Sherlock Holmes trilogy occupying 3 separate spots at 14, 17, and 20, 7 out of 20. I had to read it twice to believe it. Before heading home for Lunar New Year, I made one stop. Lucheng No. 2 Middle School, my alma mater. Principal Zheng and a group of school leaders were waiting at the gate. I had called ahead, hoping to slip in quietly, but they had assembled a full reception committee. I shook their hands and told them I was just visiting before heading back to Beijing. They walked me through the campus, the bluestone paths, the early spring sunlight filtering through bare branches, the classrooms where I had sat 4 years ago, pretending to be 17 while carrying 31 years of regret inside me. We passed the Zia building, the library I had donated. The director told me it was now the largest in Lucheng, open to the public when school was not in session. Local residents and university students came to study. I nodded and thought about the boy who had given up on himself in these halls. The boy whose grades plummeted, whose father sent him to the army because there was nothing left to try. Yuan Yali arrived after her class ended. She walked in and smiled. Liwen, It's been a long time. I stood up and hugged her gently. Long time no see, Teacher Yuan. She looked me up and down. You have grown taller and stronger, she said, much more energetic than high school. Teacher Yuan is as young and beautiful as ever. She rolled her eyes, still as talkative as ever. This was the woman who had read my first story overnight and brought it to Director Zhang, who had reported the bully plot and protected me, who had watched from Lucheng as her student won the Kafka Prize on national television. She had believed in me before anyone else had a reason to. Principal Zhang asked if I would give a speech to the students. I declined. I had not prepared anything, and I did not want to embarrass myself. But I looked around the campus, and I thought about the summers, the heat, the classrooms with no air conditioning, where students wilted at their desks every June. Principal Zhang, I said, when I get back to Beijing, I will send someone to coordinate with the school. I want to install air conditioning in every classroom, every office, and every dormitory. The room went quiet. Then every teacher smiled at once. I guess this is a benefit I am giving to my juniors, I said. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a speech or a plaque or a statue. It was air conditioning, practical, useful, exactly the kind of thing that would have made my own school years a little less miserable. The hashtag trended within a day. Students at other schools started tagging their own alumni. Where are our distinguished graduates? The child is dying of heat. I drove home to Lucheng for the new year. My parents still refused to move into the new house I had bought them. They liked their old neighborhood. They liked knowing their neighbors. My mother went out for strolls and played cards at relatives' houses. My father read the newspaper. Some things would never change, and I had learned to stop trying to change them. On Lunar New Year's Eve, we went to my uncle Li Jiandang's house. As soon as I walked in, my aunt pulled me aside. Liwen, your eldest sister brought a boyfriend home this year. You are capable and knowledgeable. Help us take a look at what he is like. I grabbed a handful of melon seeds and went into the inner room. My cousins were all there. Li Qian, Li Liqiang, Li Liji, Li Lifeng. They stood up when they saw me, stiff and formal, until I kicked Li Feng's leg and told him to stop pretending. Everyone relaxed. My sister introduced her boyfriend. Liwen, this is Ma Kingle. I knew him. In my first life, he had married my sister. He was a doctor from Tianjin Medical University, 2 years older than her, steady and decent. He had treated her well in that other timeline, made associate professor in his 40s, a good man. I shook his hand. Hello, Brother Ma. At dinner, my uncle asked about housing prices and investment timing. I gave him Sun Hepping's advice: real estate, gold, liquor stocks, if he had the stomach for volatility. The elders listened with the particular intensity of family members who have decided that their youngest nephew might actually know what he is talking about. Don't worry, uncle, I said. I guarantee a win. My cousin Lifeng leaned over and whispered, Fourth brother, you even won the Mao Dun Literature Prize. When you die, will you be in history books? I stared at him. Are you cursing me? Hey, brother, I was wrong. Outside the window, firecrackers crackled and popped. The Spring Festival Gala played on the television. My mother was telling my aunt about the air conditioning donation. My father was eating quietly, the way he always did, his silence carrying more pride than any words he could have said. My sister sat next to her boyfriend, and every few minutes, she glanced at me to see if I approved. I did. The 2014 bestseller list had 7 of my titles in the top 20. I had the Kafka Prize, the Mao Dun Prize, a Palme d'Or adaptation, a British medal I had accepted without kneeling, and 150 million copies sold worldwide. Don Quixote, my 600,000-word mirror, my knight, my confession, was being studied at 8 universities. The 4th, Sherlock Holmes, was finished. The system hummed quietly in my mind, its lottery still ready, its deep learning mode still available for 2 hours each day. But none of that was what the evening was about. The evening was about my aunt's cooking, my uncle's questions, my cousin's terrible jokes, my sister's shy smile, my father's silence, my mother's voice carrying across the room, warm and loud, and completely unimpressed by any prize I had ever won. In my first life, I had missed all of this. I had pushed my family away, smoked myself hollow, and collapsed in a parking lot at 31 with nothing but regret. I had been given a second chance, a system, a new body, a mind full of masterpieces from a world that did not exist here, and I had used it to build something extraordinary. But the extraordinary was never the point. The extraordinary was just the road. The point was always this: a family dinner, a warm room, the sound of firecrackers, and the people I loved asking me ordinary questions on an ordinary night. Hello, Liwen. Hello, New World. It was enough.